Well, hey everybody, welcome to this ON1 live event. Hudson and Dan, we're back.
Hey everybody.
Really happy to be hosting it here in my studio. And we're really excited to be announcing ON1 Photo Raw 2017.5.
Yep.
It's up, it's ready. If you guys don't have it already, go get it. If you don't have Photo Raw 2017, there's a 30-day free download trial. There's a really cool bonus package right now where you can get 4 master's courses from Matt Kloskowski to really kind of jumpstart you using all the potential of the software. There's tons of resources online on the ON1 site. Just go to the learning section. We've got videos, blog posts, tons of stuff. And of course, if you're in ON1 Plus, all those resources are available to you. So Dan's going to give us a little overview of what we're doing today. We're going to do some live editing. We're going to talk about what's new with the software. We're going to do a ton of stuff. So
yeah, and on those master courses, even if you've watched them before, they've been updated for 2017.5. So a lot of new features that may change the way you do certain things have been added. So the videos have been updated for that.
Right.
So let's kind of talk about what we're going to do during today's event. First off, we're going to jump in and we're going to talk about all the cool new stuff that's in 2017.5. Then we're going to talk about how to organize your photos. We talked to a lot of photographers, and organizing is always a tough subject for people. So we want to give you some tips from all of our user experience of here's kind of a great, easy workflow that doesn't require a lot of diligence in terms of your organization. And then we're going to jump in. We're going to do some editing. Hudson's going to show some really cool pictures from the Olympic Peninsula.
yeah, I did a trip back in 2014, and we're going to kind of go on a little blast to the past to a really, really wild part of Olympic National Park. Did some work for ON1 actually with Photo 9 back in the day with my good friend Andy. And we're going to go through, look at some of the images from that wild coastline and talk about editing, them in Photo Raw 2017.5 and what's new and different in the software. Some new ways that we can look at some old images of a really special trip. So we're going to do that.
Yeah, and then we talk about landscapes and more artistic photos all the time, but we don't really talk about portraits. So today I wanted to talk a bit more about using ON1 Photo in a portrait photographer's workflow. I'm a portrait photographer. My wife, Whitney, she owns a Bliss Studio as well. You've seen a lot of her photos and presets on our website. So I wanted to show you guys some cool before and afters and what you can do with a portrait inside of ON1 Photo. All right, well,
and we've got Q&A. We're going to have a ton of Q&A.
Lots of Q&A.
So you guys, we're going to be answering your questions. We have 2 sections where we're going to be doing Q&A. So you can ask those questions either in the right-hand pane of your browser window. If you're watching on Facebook, just type the question into the comment section. Or on Twitter, use the hashtag AskON1. And that's hashtag ASKON and the numeral 1.
Numero uno.
Numero uno.
Numero uno. All right, well, without further ado, let's actually jump in. Let's talk about some of the cool new stuff in 2017.5. I'm going to kind of rattle them off, but we're going to go through and we're going to demo all of it. So first off, there's a brand new compare mode. Compare mode is my favorite new feature. It's in browser. It allows you to zoom and compare multiple photos so you can pick out the best one.
It's like one of my favorite new updates.
Super handy. And as a portrait photographer, it's really important because you want to zoom in and see which eyes are the sharpest or which photo has the best expression, especially if it's like a family. So I'll show you how to take advantage of that. There's the new lens correction tool, which will automatically detect your lens and remove distortion from it. There's the new detail pane, which combines sharpening and noise reduction together, makes it much more intuitive to adjust those kind of competing adjustments. There's a clone stamp tool for non-destructive cloning of objects inside of development effects.
In a raw file.
In a raw file, on the raw file, non-destructively. So it's really handy. We'll talk about how to use that. We've also improved search quite a bit based on your guys' feedback. You can now stack presets again inside of effects, so all the effects users are happy. You can also have more control over your preset management. You can migrate your metadata and your catalog from Lightroom over to ON1 Photo. Plus, there's a ton of new cameras and a lot of bug fixes in this release as well. So let's jump in and we're going to talk about how to use compare mode first. So here I am, I'm inside of Browse, and I've just selected a folder. This happens to be a senior portrait session. So you can see there's a couple hundred photos in here. And oftentimes you're gonna have a situation like this, where you've got a series of photos that are all real close to each other. Because you're taking those, you're looking for the best expression, or you might have a serious one and a funny one, and you wanna go through and you wanna pick out your favorites.
Happens in events all the time too, if you're photographing events. Yeah.
Or I even get with landscapes where I'm looking for the wind or the waves.
Right.
Which waves do I like the best?
Which aperture is better than another? Yeah, absolutely.
Totally. All right, so in the past what you'd have to do is you would end up double clicking, you go into that detail mode, and you could only see one photo at a time. You'd have to kind of toggle back and forth like this to try to pick out your favorite. Now what you can do, watch, let's go back to grid view here for a second. I'm just going to select the first photo, and then I select a whole range. I'm just going to shift click on the last photo that's similar in that series. So I've got like 6 photos selected, and then you notice there's a new compare mode button right down here in the bottom. I just hit that, or I can hit the C button on my keyboard, and that'll take me into compare mode. And now I get the film strip at the bottom showing my selected photos, and then the main preview area is divided up into cells for each preview. Now here's a great tip. Hit the tab key on your keyboard and it will hide the left and the right controls so you get just the photos. You can do that in Browse. You can also do that in any module. I do it whenever I'm painting, especially when I'm working on my laptop because the screen's kind of small. It's nice to get all the real estate, so I get the controls out of the way.
I pretty much always do that in developing effects if I'm not setting up a preset.
Yeah. No, definitely. All right, so now you can see all of those photos. Let me show you a couple important features. The first one is right down here in the bottom. There's a checkbox that says lock, pan, and zoom. I always turn this on. And what this does is when I zoom in and I pan one photo, all of the other photos will zoom and pan at the same time. So watch, I'm just going to click on the first one on her face. You notice how all the photos zoom in to the same spot. And
that's the really revolutionary part for me. I mean, there's other software out there with this type of compare mode, but the ability to zoom into the same position on each image is really, really cool.
Exactly. It kind of takes the best of survey mode and the best of compare mode in Lightroom and combines it together into one. Now you notice this last photo over here, we don't quite see her face. That's because she moved a little bit from frame to frame. So I can just click on that frame, and then if I hold down the Shift key, I can reposition that frame independently, just like that. All right, and now as I drag around and I pan the photo, you can see how they all pan together. It's a really cool way to look at the same spot in a series of photos. Your next step is probably to throw out the photos that you don't like. So one of these, she might have her eyes closed, or might not be as good a focus, or maybe you don't like the expression. So let's say, I don't want to use this photo. So all I do is I deselect it. I could just shift click on it down here in the film strip, or a better way is I just hit the slash key on my keyboard. Is that slash or backslash? I can never remember.
I don't know either.
It's the one with the question mark. I'm sure someone will tell me if that's slash or backslash. I haven't used DOS in so long.
I think it's slash.
I'm gonna hit that key, and you notice how that photo goes away. I'm left with 5 photos. You notice how the previews have kind of reshuffled in size to take advantage of your screen size as best it can. And then if I get rid of another photo, you know, I don't really kind of like this little smirky smile. I'm going to get rid of that one too. You see how they keep narrowing down.
Well, and I like the fact that as you deselect images in this mode, you keep getting a larger and larger preview of the ones that are left behind, because it's always the last ones that are the hardest to choose from. So having that bigger view of the last few really makes a big difference.
Yeah, exactly. Like if I get rid of this one and I get rid of this one, I'm left with 2 photos that are really, really close to each other. So you really got to scrutinize those more. To me, I think the one on the left, I think her eyes look a little brighter, a little more sharp. So that's the one I'm going to keep. So now I can use any of the metadata keyboard shortcuts that I would on a photo anywhere else. So if I hit like 5 on my keyboard, it gets 5 stars. Or I can click right here on 5 stars, or I could make it a pick, or I could change the color label, and all of those settings will apply to the photo that has the blue box around it, my selected photo. So it's an easy way to narrow it down. The other thing you can do if you want to look at that photo on its own quickly, just double click on it, and it will actually, oops, there we go, double click, and it will pick just that photo. I can now zoom in to 100 and I could pan around on that photo. If I hit the escape key on my keyboard, it'll take me right back to compare mode where I just was. All right, so there you go. That's compare mode. Great way to pick your favorite photo from a series of photos. All right, next thing, let's go ahead and take a look at the new lens correction filter here. I am going to grab us a different photo to look at here.
I really like how lens corrections got integrated in a way that's just automated too.
Yeah, well, and it's really important to do that with lens correction because pretty much every photo that we work on these days is shot with a lens that needs some correction to it. I'm just going to reset this guy so we have the original out of the camera photo. I'm going to close the preset drawer on the left so we have a little bit more room to work. Now you notice here in Develop, it looks a little different. It used to be just the tone and color pane was on all the time. Now there's a new details pane and a lens correction pane, and they're both on all the time on every photo. We'll get to details here in a minute. Let's focus on lens correction now. I'm going to roll it down so you can take a look inside. What the lens correction does is it will look at the metadata from the photo. It knows that this was shot with my Canon 17-40 lens. It detects that and automatically finds a correction profile for it. What that profile does is it corrects for distortion, either pin cushion or barrel distortion. A lot of times on a wide angle lens, you'll get the edges that'll curve or the center will be too far away. It also gets rid of chromatic aberration. So basically the 3 color channels, they don't align quite perfectly. So you might get colors along the edges of things, especially along highlights.
Yeah, high contrast edges.
Yep.
Yeah.
It'll be really bad, especially like specular highlights. And it also will get rid of peripheral fall off. So a lot of times on a wide angle lens, the edges are actually a little bit darker.
Right.
I find it pleasing, but sometimes you don't want it, so you can remove that as well. So that profile contains data for fixing all of that. I'm just going to turn it on and off so you can see a before and an after. So there's before the correction, and there's after.
It's subtle, but it's important.
It's subtle, but it's important, exactly.
And it's particularly important for those shooting Micro Four Thirds cameras.
Oh yeah, especially for Micro Four Thirds or for the cameras that don't have interchangeable lenses, kind of the modern day high-end point and shoots. I mean, you can really see it, especially if you look along this sidewalk across the front. It's very curved.
Yep.
I would say it's very curved before I have it turned off. When it's turned off, when I turn it on, it starts to take some of that curvature out.
Those edges are where it really applies.
Now you can manually override this as well. So you notice there's a little manual roll down. If I roll that down, I can grab the distortion slider and I can adjust it manually on my own. So maybe I want to twist it a little bit more to get rid of more of the that's actually the sidewalk actually happens to be round there. If you've been to Vista House, that's not a straight sidewalk. So I'm sort of cheating. I'm actually using lens correction to help take care of some perspective issues as well. We'll show you actually how to combine this with perspective here in just a minute. Before I do that, I'm actually going to brighten up this photo a little bit. So we'll take a little detour up to the tone and color pane. And I'm just going to adjust my highlights and shadows and bring up the detail and color in this guy a little bit. So you'll see this a bunch today. This is the way that Hudson and I and everybody kind of starts on a photo. You start out with your whites and blacks and set those white and black points. I'm going to grab the white slider. And I'm just going to move it back and forth. If you hold down the J key while you do that, you'll actually see those highlights. So on this photo, I'm going to pull it down a little bit, try to recover some highlight detail. Same thing on the black slider. Grab that black slider, pull it until I get just a little bit of real blacks. There we go. That's a really important step. That sets the contrast for the photo. If you don't have any real whites or real blacks on most photos, it's going to look flat. Next up, I'm going to grab the highlight slider. I'm going to bring that down a little bit. This is more of a personal taste adjustment. And then I'm going to bring up the shadows. Now watch this. The shadow slider is awesome.
Powerful.
You can do tons with it. You notice I didn't adjust the exposure slider.
Nope.
I rarely actually adjust the exposure or the contrast. Highlight, shadows, black and whites every photo. It's not often that I go in and adjust the other two.
I sometimes adjust contrast, but I almost never touch exposure unless there was a problem, unless I made a mistake.
Yeah, exactly. That's what exposure is for. Is for if you purposely underexpose or overexpose the photo, you can adjust it. But most of the time we expose it correctly. We're dealing with the dynamic range of the scene, not the way we exposed it. So. All right, so next, let's turn up a little bit of structure while we're here, just to make the brick pop a little bit, and then I'm going to use the haze slider. Now, the haze slider is literally the secret highlight recovery tool.
It is.
I have loved this thing. So it's designed to get rid of like haze and fog in a photo, but I also love to use it on sky. So watch this. So I grab the haze slider and I pull it down. It brings back tons of detail and color in that sky.
It's
like
amazing.
That. Yeah, it's like the make your sky awesome slider too. All right, so there we go. So I've done a little bit just to correct the photo. I'm going to crop off some of the junk on the sides here. Just grab the crop tool. I'm going to bring these in a little bit, like this and like this. I'm going to level the photo right up here. There's the little leveling tool. I'm going to click on that. I'm just going to drag a straight line across something that should be straight in the photo. So like I happen to know that this brick up here should be straight. So we'll correct that. It's a pretty subtle little tweak. Actually, let me try it again. I don't think I moved at all.
It's like you had it pretty straight when you photographed it.
Which is rare for me. So there we go. Yeah, it's a pretty subtle change.
I was the same way till I started using fluid heads and level it up to get it stays level.
Well, I have like this little level in the back of my camera and I always forget to turn it on. So. So anyway, I've improved that a bit. The reason I did it is I wanted to show you the transform pane while we're here. Because the transform and the lens correction kind of work hand in hand. And a lot of people actually get confused as to what their purpose is. The lens correction pane is for correcting distortion from the lens itself. You're going to get that no matter how you point the lens, that distortion is going to be there.
Right.
Perspective adjustment, the type of things you change with transform, are different. That's what happens when you tilt the camera up or down or left or right. It's going to cause lines in the photo to converge. So you notice this photo looks like the building's kind of receding backwards.
Sure, it's like if you're taking a photo of the Empire State Building, the top of it's, way hundreds and hundreds of feet above you while the base is right in front of you, so it's going to look smaller as it gets further away from you.
Exactly. So you can correct some of that. Now, obviously, like the Empire State Building, you're not going to want to do that because that's the whole heart of it.
It would look pretty weird.
Yeah, on a photo like this, I could use it to help straighten those lines out, or I could do the opposite. I could actually make it look even more foreboding if I wanted to. So I'm going to click on Show More. I'll add the Transform pane. And then I'll just use the vertical slider. So you can see if I pull it back, it'll help to straighten up that perspective and bring those lines more parallel to each other. Or if I wanted the opposite, if I want to make the building look even bigger and more daunting, I could bring it up just like that.
It's so fascinating. It makes it whether it's a portrait of the sky or the building.
Yeah, pretty much.
Yeah.
Pretty much. Yeah. All right. So that's lens correction. You also got a little taste of Transform while we were in there talking about it. Next up, let's talk about the detail pane. Now, if you joined us on our last broadcast, we talked a little bit about some of the changes in the detail pane. Let me jump over and grab a different photo for us to work on for this.
This is really exciting.
Yeah, and actually, the changes that we made in the detail pane are based on the feedback that Hudson gave us. So we can call this the Hudson Henry patented details pane. So I'm going to turn it on here, and I'm going to zoom in. I'm going to zoom in really close. Now, the reason I'm using this photo, and I think you guys may have seen it before, is it has the biggest, ugliest golf ball size noise that I could find. And when we do the screen broadcasting for this, the screen can get a little soft. So I want to make sure you guys can actually see what we're seeing so that you can see how to adjust this.
Well, this is a film scan. So,
yeah, this happens to be a film scan too, so that helps out a lot. All right, so when we created the detail pane, it combines the sharpening and the noise reduction together. And the reason we did that, and Hudson can explain this even better than I can, but they kind of fight each other. Yeah. As you increase the sharpness, you're going to bring out the noise. If you decrease the noise, you're going to lose some sharpening. They kind of fight each other.
They're really two sides of the same coin, because as you do noise reduction, you're really creating sort of a micro blur to get rid of that noise, and that winds up reducing the sharpness of your image. So you have to kind of bring those two things into balance. So having all the controls in one place is really critical.
Yeah. And the other thing we did is we added some really handy overlays so that you can kind of intelligently make those adjustments. You can remove the distractions. So let me show you how this works. I always start with the noise reduction, and I'm going to start down here at the bottom with the color noise reduction. So when you think about noise, there's two kinds. There's color noise reduction, which is generally caused by I don't want to get into the details of it, but the way the sensor in the camera works, it has to make up the colors 2/3 of the time. So sometimes it guesses wrong, and that's how you get color noise. And then there's the luminance noise, which is kind of the same thing, but just on the black and white part of the photo. The two have to be adjusted independently, because on color noise, it's often a lot larger, and you can be more aggressive with it without having any negative side effects. Whereas when it comes to the luminance noise, you have to be very careful with it.
Yeah, the luminance noise is where the problems, with sharpness.
I'm going to zoom in even one more time here so we can get in really close.
Yeah.
All right, so there we go. Hopefully you guys can see that color noise. And that color noise will look like little red or green or blue variations in what should be a nice clean sky, right? So to adjust it, we'll grab the color noise reduction slider. And I'm just going to pull that up and adjust it. And you can sort of see how that color goes away. But it's fairly subtle. So we made it easier to tell the threshold of that by holding down the Option key or the Alt key on your keyboard. So if you hold that down and you adjust the detail slider, so you can see, if I have it set to 0 and I hold that Option key down, we remove the luminance and all you're seeing is the color. If you're a Photoshop person, this is like looking at the A and B channels in a lab photo. You're just looking at the color. So the idea is to adjust it until that kind of noisy, stipply pattern in the sky goes away. So I can just adjust that amount up until it goes away, just like that.
So great.
Yeah, so now when you do that, all that color noise has gone away, and now you're left with just the luminance noise. Adjusting the luminance noise, kind of the same idea. We go up to the luminance slider up here. I'm going to hold down that Option key, and I'm just going to drag it up, and I'm going to watch until that noise goes away. Now this part is much more of a personal preference, and it kind of depends on if you shot film in the past, what your personal style is. You know, I shot film, a lot of black and white film. I love grain, and to me the noise is grain. So I tend to just barely take the edge off of it, if at all.
Well, and I think if you have an image with noise in it, particularly some of the Milky Way low light images, if you remove all the noise, you get this kind of painterly effect where it's not really looking like an image anymore. It looks more like a painting, and so it's an artistic decision. Noise reduction and sharpening are really a bit of an art, and each person's going to have an individual preference and taste. You just have to start doing it more and more, and you'll develop your own, I think.
Yeah, and it varies from photo to photo too, honestly.
Absolutely.
So I'm going to kind of take this up to the extreme so you can kind of see what we're talking about. If we were to drag this all the way up to the top, you can see how everything gets very smooth. It kind of takes on a little bit of a painterly look. If I hold down that Option key on my keyboard while I do that, it pulls the color out, so we're focusing just on the luminosity.
So great.
So you can really look at just the edge of that. Now again, for me personally, I just want to soften it a little bit. Well, no, we'll go extreme today. Let's actually go, just for illustration's sake, I'm going to go up to like 70, so we really get rid of all that noise. Now, one thing you didn't notice is we didn't adjust the detail slider on either of these. What the detail slider does is it adjusts for the size of the noise. Think of the luminance and color slider as adjusting for the amount of noise. So most of the time, keeping the detail sliders pretty low is what you need to do. But if you have one with really, really big grain, especially if maybe you've cropped a photo or you've resized it up a lot, then you might need to take those detail sliders and bring them up too. So if you watch, if I hold down that Option key and adjust the detail slider, it will actually change basically the size of that noise reduction. And because this one is super duper noisy, I'm going to turn that one up a little bit.
Sure.
There we go. Once I've removed the noise, it's time to bring back the detail on the edges. And I'm going to do that with the sharpening control. And this is, again, more of a personal preference. I'm just going to bring that up. If you hold down that Option key while you do it, you'll see just the luminosity. I'm going to bring it up until I see the edge of it starting to bring back noise in the areas that I've smoothed out. Somewhere around 50 for this photo.
Looks great.
And then you'll adjust the masking slider. What the masking slider does is it removes sharpening from the more continuous tone, or the areas of less difference. The way sharpening works is for every pixel, it's trying to push them further apart. And if you don't turn that up at all, it's going to add more sharpening to the sky, which is going to enhance the noise you just try to get rid of. So to adjust this,
I was thinking masking is sort of, it's almost like a filter to target your noise to the edges that you want and get rid of the sharpening in the noise.
Exactly. So as you adjust this, hold down the Option key or that Alt key again, and you'll see the actual mask of what's getting sharpened. Everything that's white is getting sharpening applied. Everything that's black, the sharpening is not getting applied to. So just adjust that up until you're kind of only affecting the edges of your photo. Now it's going to depend on your photo how high you're going to turn this up. In most cases, it's going to be pretty low. So you're like 3 or 4. There are cases where you're going to turn it up higher on a really highly detailed photo. That's why the slider has a really long range. But most of the time, you're only going to turn it up the first with under 10 probably. All right, so let's turn this on and off so you can see before and after. So there's before the noise reduction.
It's dramatic.
And after.
It's really dramatic.
So it kept all the detail in the crevasses and the rocks, but yet it removed all that chunky noise from the sky and from the snowfields, just like that.
Well, and I really want to commend you guys because it's not only organized in a really easy to use way, and it's got, you know, the ability to hit that Option key, that Alt key, and see the mask of what you're doing, but it's more powerful than it was in the earlier iteration too. It's really, really doing a great job. Now that said, there are different times in your workflow for different types of noise reduction and sharpening. What we're talking about here in Develop, in the detail pane, is your base level noise and sharpening. What are you doing on the raw stuff? Your input noise reduction and sharpening. Inside of effects, there's still the sharpening and noise reduction pane, like there has always been, which gives you the ability to do more stylized adjustments. So a lot of times you might want to add sharpness, but then use the masking tools to selectively paint it in on parts of your photo that are interesting. I do that all the time to enhance the details I'm interested in. Or conversely, I've got a really tough spot like a sky, or maybe I've combined a texture in that has a different sky and I want to reduce the noise in a local way. I can do the same thing. And then of course there's sharpening for output, which you do when you're actually going to print, and that's to compensate for the printer paper combination. The ink is going to spread out and you'll lose a little bit of sharpness as well. Print sharpening is a totally different thing.
That's totally different. That's one of the last things you do in your workflow based on where you're going, and I always do that in resize because I resize my photo and print it right from inside of resize. So anyway, that is the new detail pane. Everybody can thank Hudson for his great ideas and bringing that to you guys. The next one we're going to look at is the clone stamp tool. So let me grab a different photo here. And let's use this one. So in ON1 Photo, there's a couple different existing tools for retouching. There's the Perfect Eraser, which is a content-aware filling tool. You just brush over what you want to remove, and it will find matching color and texture in the photo and will fill it in. Most of the time, it's a great tool. It's the one I use the most. There's also the Retouch Brush, which is great for portrait retouching. It gives you a little more control over the feather and the opacity, but there's still times, especially when you need to align things perfectly, that those tools will not do what you need. That's where we put in the clone stamp tool. And if you're an old Photoshop guy like me, and I started back in Photoshop 2.5, you know how to use
versions before me.
It was before layers. The clone stamp is the go-to, most reliable tool. You can make it do whatever you need to do. And it can do things that no other tool can do. So let me give you an example. Here, if we look at this photo, there's a broken baluster holding up this railing. If I tried to use any of those other smart retouching tools, there's no way it could accurately fill that in. But the clone stamp can. Let's zoom in a step here. And I'm just going to move over a little bit. There we go. I'll grab the clone stamp tool. It lives right underneath the other two retouching tools. And the difference is you have to set a source. You have to say, I want to take the pixels from here and I want to put them over here. So to do that, you'll hit the Option key or the Alt key and click on your new source. So what I want to do is look for baluster. I hope I'm using the correct architectural term. Sure. Whatever these are. Someone will correct us, I'm sure. I can stick over here. So this one happens to have kind of the same kind of background behind it as this one. So I'm just going to come over here, make my brush a little bit bigger.
And I'm just going to step, we're working on the raw file here.
This one happens to be a PSD, but it came from a raw file.
But we could do this with raw files. Sure. That's revolutionary.
Yeah, file type doesn't matter.
Yeah.
So if I hold the Option key down, I'm going to click to sample it. It now knows I'm taking the pixels from here. You notice how the brush is now filled with those pixels. So you can help align it up. I notice I got my feather maybe a little too high. I'm going to turn my feather down a little bit. There we go. I align that up with where I'm going to brush to. And then I'm just going to paint down. Just like that. So there you go. I was able to accurately fill that thing in and get rid of it.
Ridiculous.
So that's the really cool thing about the clone stamp. The clone stamp, you can also adjust your size and your feather and your opacity, so it's a really good tool for doing portrait retouching as well. I'll turn my opacity down to about 30, my feather way up, and it's great for doing skin retouching. Let me show you one other time where it can be really handy and where other retouching tools will fail. It's when you're trying to maintain a very consistent pattern, like in fabric or in brick. Those kind of get smushed when you use other retouching tools. But when I use the clone stamp, again, I can target exactly what I want.
It happens in landscapes too, with like fine vegetation or trees. It's
Or even sometimes there's a very important line, and I want to make sure that line is maintained, like on a horizon line, or like the sea and sky meet. You have to make sure that line doesn't get a little hook in it or something. So clone stamp, I want to get rid of this electrical conduit. If I was to use another tool, let's say I use like the perfect eraser for this, make it a little bit smaller here, and I brush it out. It'll do a good job of getting rid of it, but it's not going to maintain the mortar line. You notice between the bricks, brick courses, that's where they put the mortar in there. It's going to get rid of that, but it's going to kind of make it look like this double tall course of bricks. All right. So rather than doing that, we'll use the clone stamp. The clone stamp, I can come right up here. I can set my source on another one of those mortar lines, like this one up here, and now I'll just paint across.
Easy.
Just like that. So now I was able to get rid of it, but still keep the mortar line in there.
That's nice.
All right, cool. All right, so that's the new clone stamp tool. Next, let's talk about some of the new improved searching capabilities inside of Browse. Let's go back over here to Browse, and we're going to go down to the filter pane. Inside of the filter pane, there's a new advanced roll down. Before we get to that, let me just remind you guys some of the stuff you can do in the filter pane. The filter pane will take whatever your current view is, basically whatever you're looking at, whether it's a folder or an album, and it'll help you find stuff inside of that. So you can search based on things like stars or colors. You can search on photos taken at a certain time or date range.
Liked or disliked.
Yeah, liked or disliked. Or there's a simple text search field, which will search any searchable metadata, keywords, description, folder name, file name, author, all that stuff. It'll search all of it. And for a lot of times, this is all that you really need, but there's times where you need to do a more advanced, more precise search. So we've added this advanced roll down right here. And if I roll this down, I can now pick any of those fields and the exact value for each of those fields. So let's say I want to find all the photos taken with a certain lens because I think maybe it's a little soft wide open, maybe I need to get it repaired.
Sure.
So this is kind of something you would do. I'm going to come in here and I'm going to say search all of my index folders. We'll talk about what the value of an index folder is here in a minute. But what this does is it basically means search all my photos, not just the ones in the current folder.
Right.
And then from the advanced search section, I'm just going to go find that lens. So let's say I'm going to look for, whose lens is and I'll just scroll down here until I find my lens. It will actually only populate this list with the lenses that your photos contain. Keep in mind, I do a lot of testing, so I have a gazillion lenses in my list. Your list, you'll probably only have 3 or 4, depending on how many lenses you have. So there's my Canon 17-40. I'll select that one right there. And then I can click the Add button to add more to it. Yeah, to add another field. So I'll click on that, because if I look at my search results here, let me actually just go to grid view so you can see we had 2,700 photos. I'm not going to look through 2,700 photos to figure out which ones are sharp.
No.
So the next thing I want to do is say, well, it's only soft when I shoot it wide open.
Sure.
So let's search by aperture, whose aperture, this happens to be f4, is the fastest aperture on this lens. So that narrows it down to 237 photos. And you know, I've really only noticed it on my 6D, my newer camera. So I'll click the Add button and I'll say whose camera is a Canon 6D. There we go. Now it's narrowed down to 172. That's probably a little more reasonable collection to go through and check out the sharpness and see if there really is an issue, if I need to send that lens off for repair or something, or if I need to make some adjustments to it. So that's kind of the power of that advanced search section.
It's really powerful.
Yeah. There's one other thing I'll show you right here. You notice there's one little pop-up I didn't mention. It says match all criteria. That means the photos I search for have to have this lens at this aperture on this camera. If I change this from match all to match any, it will find all of the photos that were shot on that camera and all the photos that were shot with that lens and all the photos that were shot with f4. Obviously a lot of photos. Yeah. So, but that's really helpful if you're looking for 2 disparate things by keywords. Let's say I'm looking for cats and dogs.
Sure.
In the past, I'd have to do those 2 separate searches. I couldn't search 2 different things at the same time. This lets me search both.
And then you can really easily click that you only want 3-star and better, or blue photos of cats and dogs that are 3 stars and better. And really start narrowing your results down to exactly what you're looking for.
Yep.
It's great.
Yeah. And those same options are in the Smart Album pane, so you can actually create a saved search that will populate that exact same way too.
Nice.
So very handy for finding stuff.
Really handy.
All right, let's see. A couple other things I wanted to show you guys. Let's talk about stacking presets. So if you've used effects, or if you've used a previous version of effects, you had the ability to stack presets on top of each other. And that was something that we kind of temporarily lost when we switched the engine over to the new raw processing engine. We combined the presets together to have both development effects. But
it was a little topic of debate in the Plus forums for the community.
Exactly.
There were people who were like, where did that go?
Where did that go? Yeah. So we realized that was really important to users, and we worked hard to make sure we could get it back. Again, that's the cool thing about like the ON1 photo project and the Plus community, is it really lets people tell us what they want. So like that advanced search thing that we just added, that was something we were going to do next year, but everybody was saying how important it was. We decided to pull it up and do it this year instead. So
it's one of the really great powers of the ON1 Plus community, I feel like, is the user input really translates to action on the company really listens.
Yeah, no, we definitely do. We're not just a bunch of engineers sitting in a room figuring out what's cool to go make. You know, we want to talk to our customers and find out what's important to them. Yeah. All right, so I was talking about stacking, right?
Yep.
Right, so let's take a photo. I'm going to go into effects with it. And let's say I'm going to start out with, let me open up my preset drawer over here on the left. Let's say I'm going to start out with one of the new, oops, that must be in the preset tab, not the filter tab. I'm going to start out with one of the new starting point presets. This is something we added recently. The starting points are great places to start. You can kind of think of them like a workspace. It's going to add kind of the filters you're going to need for a certain genre of photo. So I've got one down here that's my urban starting point. And when I click on that, let's see what it does.
Definitely fits the photo.
Yeah, it's going to add a tone enhancer, dynamic contrast, of course.
Of course. Color
enhancer, and a vignette. So it's kind of my good starting point. And then I'll just go through and adjust these based on my own taste. You know, maybe I want to add a little heavier vignette, and you know, maybe that dynamic contrast is a little heavier than what I want. There we go. So I kind of get that tuned. And
I don't mean to sound like a broken record, but I think a preset is always basically a starting point.
Oh yeah, yeah. It's pretty rare that you would take it whole hog, unless it happened to be something like maybe one of the film looks.
Yep.
So let's say I want to take this photo, which I've kind of optimized, but now I want to add a film look to it. Right. So I would go back to my presets. Let's go to the new color film preset category. These are all designed to look like different old-fashioned color negative and color slide films. And let's say I wanted to add one of these. So, you know, I really like this Fuji 400. So I click on that and watch what'll happen. Oh, well, it adds that, but yeah, I lost all the work I did before. So let me undo that here. So I'm back where I was. Now, watch this. If I hold the Option key or the Alt key on my keyboard down instead, It's kind of subtle, but you'll see how all those thumbnails redraw to show you what it will look like if it's inserted or stacked on top instead.
That's cool.
Yeah, that even works through the Quick View browser. If I hold the Option key down and then I click on the Quick View browser, I can see those being stacked rather than replaced. Yeah. So now if I click on that, it will now insert that preset above all my other stuff. So let me roll this back up here so you can see how it kept everything below from vignette on down was from the first preset, and then from black and white on up was added with that color film look.
Very cool.
Yeah. If you can't remember that option click, just right click on a preset and from a menu select insert preset instead. Does the same thing.
Gotcha.
Cool. All right. While we're talking about presets, a couple other things have changed. In the preset categories, you can now hide categories that you don't use. So let's say you don't do anything with sports. You don't care about the sports category. You can right click on that and select hide a category. And that will hide it so you don't have to see it anymore in your list. You can also rename a category if you want to change it, and you can export a category, which is really cool. Let's say you've made a bunch of presets that you like and you want to easily put them on another one of your computers, or you want to give it to one of your friends. You can just export that entire category. Cool. It bundles it up into one file that all you do is you take it to the other computer, you double click on it, and installs it.
It installs it with the name that it was.
Installs it with the name. If you use borders and textures, it makes sure the borders and textures get installed with it. So it's much easier to move your stuff from computer A to computer B. All right, I think I got one more thing I want to show you guys, and that is the new Lightroom Migration Assistant. That helps you to take your data from Lightroom and move it over to ON1 Photo. You find it inside of Lightroom, you go to File, Plugin Extras, and down to Migrate Catalog to ON1 Photo. Here we go. Now what this will do is it will take all of your top level folders that you've created in Lightroom. You know, every photo that you add in Lightroom gets added to a folder over here in my folders pane. So this particular catalog has one top level folder, but as many top level folders as you have.
Right.
Those top level folders get migrated over as index folders into ON1 Photo, which then means all the photos inside of them get indexed, and we get all of the metadata that way. So any keywords or descriptions or things like that you've added inside of Lightroom, they'll show up inside of ON1 Photo as well.
They give you all that power, that advanced search capability and everything.
Yeah, exactly. So you get all that power of the database comes over with it. You also then have the option to migrate your collections. So all of your collections that you've created in Lightroom will get migrated over as to albums inside of ON1 Photo. And you can also create copies of your photos that had your Lightroom adjustments on them. So let's say there's some of your photos you've gone in and you've done a lot of retouching work, or you've done a lot of processing with presets, and you want to make sure you don't lose that work. You can create a copy of the raw photo that you originally worked on as a JPEG or a TIFF or a PSD that has that Lightroom information rendered to it. That way you have all that information or all those settings there. All right, cool. Now, of course, there's also a ton of new raw cameras that were added, lots of new lens profiles, and a lot of bugs that we fixed in this release as well. All right, let's see if the audience has any questions about some of these new features.
We're going to do a little bit of Q&A before we jump into the getting organized section, and we'll have a little video for a break. But so if you guys want to send those questions in, the right pane of the browser, the Facebook comments, or hashtag AskOn1 on Twitter, and that's hashtag ASKON1. So we got a question here, a couple questions about the lens corrections. So how many lenses are currently supported?
So right now there's 842, if I remember right. That is something that we will add more lenses whenever there's a release, just like we add new cameras. It's the same idea. So every time we update the software, you'll get new lenses along with that as well.
Okay, we have a question about whether noise reduction was improved. I think we probably covered that. Noise reduction has been dramatically improved, both in its performance and in the ease of using it and just the organization of it. I think it's been dramatically improved.
Before you, add one caveat on the lens correction stuff, because this has confused a few folks. The lens correction is designed to work on a RAW photo, because a RAW photo has a couple things going for it. One, it has all the metadata that we need to properly do the lens correction. It's not just the name of the lens. We have to know the aperture, the focal length, and the size of sensor in order to do that lens correction correctly. Plus, we also know that no other corrections have been done on a RAW file already. So you can use lens correction on other non-RAW photos, but it's not going to automatically match. It's going to require you to pick what you want and to override it with those manual sliders. A lot of times, especially on the newer cameras, the JPEG that comes out of the camera already has lens correction applied to it. So you don't want to double apply that lens correction on top of it. So
that makes
plus
sense.
You could have cropped it and done other things, which will then make lens correction do wacky things. So it's really designed for RAW photos.
We've got another question about index folders, which since we were just talking about that, what is an index folder and why do I need them?
Sure, and we'll dig into this a little bit more in the next section when we talk about organizing. An index folder, think of it like a catalog folder. It's a folder that we keep an eye on, so we know what all the photos that are in that folder and all of its subfolders, and we've already got a thumbnail ready to show you, so it's faster to browse, and we've extracted all the metadata from those so that you can do that searching through the filter pane very quickly with it. We'll talk more about the benefits of it here in just a couple minutes when we do the organizing section. Though.
So we got a question about Photoshop integration from the Twittersphere. Where is the palette in Photoshop, and will RAW automatically create a new adjusted RAW layer?
Okay, so there's two ways to get to Photoshop, and it's kind of a push or a pull option. So let me jump back to Browse first. And a lot of it kind of depends on where you do certain types of your processing. You can take any photo from Browse, right-click, and you can send it to Photoshop or Lightroom or any other application that you want to. And that will send either the original photo, or if you've done processing adjustments inside of Photo RAW, it'll send a copy over to Photoshop. That's kind of the new way to think about it. If you're still using our app as a plugin to Photoshop instead, you'll access it from the File Automate menu. In the past, we used to have a little HTML panel that would allow you to access certain presets from inside of it. That unfortunately has been retired. The technology behind that isn't being maintained any longer, so it's not something that we can continue to march forward with. So to get to your presets, you'll have to open up the plugin through the File Automate or the Filter menu to do that. And what was the other question?
It was about whether or not once you're done working on the file in Photoshop, is it going to create a new layer with RAW adjustments if you're a Photoshop user?
That is up to you, actually. So through the preferences, you can pick whether you work on the actual layer or a copy of the layer. Sure. Or what I prefer to do is I actually create a smart object in Photoshop and I work on it as a smart object. The great thing about that is it's re-editable. You can go back and all of the work you've done inside of Photo RAW via Photoshop, you can re-edit. Even the brush strokes and all the masks are still remembered because it's all non-destructive that way. So
I would
that's
highly
the preferred way to use it
for
sure.
Absolutely. So we got a couple more things here. Let's see. Have you improved results for the Fuji X-Trans sensor? They're saying that the results are really good, but are they even better now?
That's one that we always are improving on. Those are a tricky little sensor to work on. And we have definitely made some improvements to that. Keep in mind that it's kind of small little jumps every release on that one. It's not going to dramatically change because it already does a pretty good job. So.
When we're doing the auto catalog export from Lightroom, will it find the information that you've entered into metadata?
Mm-hmm. Yep, definitely. The only thing that doesn't get migrated over, and this is just kind of the way that it works, is if you've used the pick or reject flags inside of Lightroom. Those are Lightroom proprietary fields that don't get stored in the metadata, so those don't get brought over. But labels, star ratings, keywords, description, anything you'd put in the IPTC fields, all of that will get migrated over.
Well, so I think that's about all we're going to do for questions at this particular juncture. We're going to have a bunch more Q&A at the end of the live session. In the meantime, we're going to jump out to kind of a brand new, exciting ON1 on location. It's Matt Klaskowski and I up on Steen's Mountain. This is the first time we've aired it. We just got it finished, so I hope you guys enjoy. Here's the video. After several days of photographing the stark beauty of the Alvord Desert, we're moving on. From our camp on the playa, we've been looking at the ridgeline of the Steen's mountain range since we arrived. Now, we're excited to get up there and explore it. The route there is far from direct. The east side of the Steens is incredibly steep and rugged, so we're circling around to the west side, which slopes up steadily for miles toward the 5,000-foot drop back down to the Alvord. This side of the mountain boasts the highest road in Oregon. It takes you to within a short walk of the summit. At just shy of 10,000 feet, it's an absolutely phenomenal view from the top. When you're hitting several locations in only a few days, you just work with what you've got at every sunset. This one is cloudless again, so we add a new subject matter for drama. In this case, each other. The images we're getting are a ton of fun despite the sky being less than dramatic. The next morning we're up early, prepping for sunrise. It's cold and the wind picked up overnight. Wait, is this our main road? I think it is. By first light, we're up at the rim, and it's a full-on gale.
It's really windy. Normally I'd be shooting at this time because I actually love to shoot, you know, like a half hour before sunrise. I love that, the color in the sky and everything. I'll head out here in a minute. Hudson, on the other hand, is much more brave than me. Hudson is actually out there shooting right now.
Shooting in high winds, lightweight camera support will inevitably let you down. The tiniest bit of flex or instability in your tripod will keep you from getting sharp images. Even a loose camera strap flapping around can ruin an otherwise great shot. With few clouds once again, we know the only truly great shots will be in the few seconds that the sun is just peeking over the horizon. I have several go-to lenses I use to get that classic sunburst that we all love. I won't bore you too much with the physics behind sun stars, but the gist of it is that the smaller you make the sun and the smaller your aperture, the more pronounced the sun star will be, so shoot wide and stop down. And the reason they look even better if the sun is partially obscured by the horizon in this case, is that you're effectively making the sun smaller in your frame. But the takeaway is that sun stars are just cool. They add something really special to a scene.
Well, my friend, until next time. Until next time.
Matt has to speed off to the city to catch a flight, but luckily, I'm able to take the long way home. I'm in no rush, which is great, because sometimes you get some of your best images when you thought you were done shooting. So keep your cameras handy, and I'll see you next time.
Hey, welcome back, everybody. Thanks for joining us today. A couple reminders, if you just joined us, the session is being recorded, so you can always go back and watch one of the earlier parts of the session. I'm Dan, this is Hudson. Thanks for joining us today. We're talking about the new ON1 PhotoRAW 2017.5.
Super exciting stuff.
Yeah. Now, before we jump into organizing, I did want to talk specifically to some of our users who are probably looking at this for the first time, who maybe have an older version. We've talked about a lot of the cool new things that are in 2017.5, but I also wanted to mention some of the things that were in 2017, the original release, that you aren't being able to use right now. I think the biggest one is the non-destructive editing capabilities.
Huge.
Yeah. So it's all instruction based. So your photos don't get any bigger, copies don't get created on your hard drive. You can copy and paste and sync settings across multiple photos. You can take those settings from one photo and apply it to 100 in the same folder. That's all done instantly without having to go through and actually process every one of those photos.
And the thing that really sort of changes my workflow and the way that I'm dealing with things is the ability to, I always thought about raw processing the file with its basic raw settings, and I tended to use Lightroom's Develop for that, and then bounce into effects to do my finish editing with a PSD file or with a TIFF file. And now the ability to bounce back and forth between Develop and effects and just say, ooh, you know what, I should have boosted those shadows a little bit more before I do my finish edit. I'm still in the raw file. I haven't even changed a pixel in the image, and I'm also using way less space on my hard drive for the image. So the flexibility and storage savings are really huge.
Definitely. And kind of like you can bounce seamlessly between the raw processing, the developing, and the effects, because the two kind of are
all raw processing.
It's all the same thing. It really is.
Pretty great.
And it's instant to go between those. It doesn't
got masking
apply
and cloning and
crazy
stuff on a raw file.
Yeah. So lots of cool changes there. There's obviously the new raw processing engine. It's a complete state-of-the-art raw processing engine. It's all done in the GPU, so it's way faster. You notice as we're moving sliders and we're brushing today, it's all instantaneous. Hopefully you guys can kind of see that and feel that over the broadcast. Sometimes things can lag a little bit, but as you adjust those things, everything is instant. There's no waiting at all anymore. It's pretty awesome. There's the new local adjustment tools for painting in changes. There's the film strip and compare modes that are new color film presets. If you're a Windows user, it now supports Windows high DPI displays, which is really important, especially if you're working on like a Surface tablet, or you've got it in one of those big 4K displays. Being able to get the UI to scale correctly. And of course, if you bought a new camera and you want to get support for those new cameras, you'll need to stay up to date with your software as well.
Oh, and just so you guys, if you're new and joining, we're doing Q&A at the end of this live session, so make sure you ask your questions in the right pane of your browser, Facebook comments section, or at hashtag #AskOn1 on Twitter. So the number 1.
All right. Let's talk about organizing now. So I talk with a lot of photographers. One of my goals is to kind of find out what their big pain points are so that we can continue to make the software better for them. And, you know, when you go and you talk to photographers, you think they're going to talk about, oh, I wish the masking did this, or I wish there was this kind of filter. And you know what they want to talk about? Organizing. That's the biggest pain that we all have. And despite...
How do I find my stuff?
Yeah, how do I find my stuff? I've got pictures over here, and I got copies here, and not over there, and none of it's backed up. So what Hudson and I thought we would do is kind of give you guys a crash course on how to get organized in the least painful way that we could come up with. So I'm going to kind of talk about the way that I do it. Hudson will talk about the way that he organizes. They're pretty darn close to each other, actually.
Similar, yeah, without any collaboration, actually. So just years of figuring it out.
Yeah, I mean, between the two of us, we've probably got 30, 40 years of dealing with this sort of thing. So for me, the key to organization is a logical folder structure on your computer. Don't rely on the software to organize your photos for you. Do it yourself.
Yeah.
And there's a couple reasons for that. What happens if that software goes away that you're using? You know, I used to use Lightroom for everything. Well, now I'm using ON1 Photo. If I had put everything into Lightroom, keep in mind now the migration assistant, so that makes it a little easier, but God forbid, let's say I used Apple Aperture or iPhoto. All the work that I've done in there is only relevant to that app. If I want to use something else, I'm starting over from scratch. But if you keep your stuff organized in a folder, then all that organization travels with you no matter where you go and what application you use.
Right.
Now, the way you choose to do that is kind of up to you, and there's no real right or wrong way to it. So the way that I do it is I do it based on genre, the type of photo that they are. So if we come over here and we look at my indexed folders, and I'll talk about the value of an index folder here in a second. Inside of my index folders, I've got one called personal images. And inside of personal images, I have subfolders for all the different major genres. So I've got, you know, one for, I like airplanes, so I have one for aircraft and one for animals and one for landscape or flowers, things like that. As I dig into each of these, let's say maybe I go to my landscape folder and I roll that down, it starts at the country level, and then from the country level it goes down. So if I open up the United States, it goes to states. Let's say I go to Oregon, and then inside of the Oregon folder, I've got all the different places that I would shoot within the state. And if I drill down those even more, maybe I go to Columbia Gorge, that's a place that I shoot a lot. I can roll that down. And just by rolling down a few of those folders, I can pretty easily get to the photos from an individual location or an individual shoot. Now, the other cool thing about this is I can search based on that path name. So remember that everything field that I searched with down here, right here, you can get that just by doing Command F or Control F. It'll automatically bring you right up to that search field. It searches the path name.
Sure.
So I don't have to worry about keywords. I hate keywords. I understand their value. Trust me, I've worked in digital asset management for a long time, but I hate doing keywording. It's like cleaning out your garage. Nobody wants to do keywording.
Yeah, I only really do keywording on my very best images, the ones that I know are going to be going out into the blogosphere and the internet and, you know, wherever it happens to be going. And I want to know, I can easily find. So
yeah, and there are times that I use keywords as well. Like what I do is I keep track of my portfolio by using keywords, and then I've got these smart albums over here that I've created. A smart album is like a saved search, and it goes out and it finds all the photos that happen to have that keyword that I use to trigger that. Right. So like if I want to find my best pictures of people, I just add I think it's man is the keyword that I use, and they all appear in this smart album right there, just like that.
Cool.
And then I sync these to my mobile phone using our Photovia app. So in my pocket, I've got an up-to-date portfolio all the time that I can share.
So just by adding that keyword, automatically it's in there.
Automatically it's on my phone.
That's great.
Yeah. All right, so let's go back up here to the folders a little bit, and we'll talk about that. So that's kind of the way that I do it. A lot of people will also do date instead. They'll organize by their date, or if you're a professional and you're shooting commercial work, you probably organize it by client instead.
I'm kind of, I need it to be as simple as possible for me. That's the only way it's really going to work, and I'm going to do it every time when I come back exhausted after a long shoot. And also, I do a lot of shoots where, say, I'm gone for a month in Patagonia or something. So I keep years. My folder structure starts starts with the year. So 2017 and 2016, 2015, 2014. And then within that year, I put the year in the shoot. So if it's 2017 Patagonia, and I'll go through and cull through all of those images. And when I really get my best images, my 3-star images, even some of my 2-star images, I have this weird thing about stars. I don't use 4 and 5. I'm reserving those for
You've never seen a 4 or 5.
Yeah, I mean, eventually I'm going to want to differentiate between my best images of now, and I need another level to go. So I'm kind of reserving 4 and 5. To me, the best of a shoot's a 2, and after I edit them, I'll pick some that are 3s, and 3s are my best. So, you know, I'll go through those 3-star images are going to get keyworded a bit to be able to find the same way that you are. You know, I might put waterfall, I might put Columbia River Gorge, I might put Oregon, but it's really just the date and then a shoot name for me at this point.
Yeah.
It's very similar.
Yeah, no, it's very close.
Yeah.
So the other thing is I do keep all of my photos in the same place, and I put them into an indexed folder. We mentioned a little bit earlier, an index folder is a folder that we automatically keep an eye on. So when you create an index folder, we go through and we find every single photo in all of the folders and all of the subfolders, and we extract all of the metadata from them, so that all that metadata becomes searchable, and we generate a little thumbnail for all of them, so that when I go to browse them, it's instantaneous to look at the thumbnails from those photos. That also empowers some of the other features, like smart albums will search inside of your index folders. Being able to publish to PhotoVia, you need to be able to do that. Or searching across multiple folders, it needs to be inside of an index folder. The next thing I do is I actually take that index folder and I back it up to my cloud storage service. For me, I use Dropbox. You use whatever service you want. Everybody gives away a terabyte for free these days, it seems. So I use Dropbox. Dropbox integrates with our app seamlessly. I don't have to use a special proprietary service or anything for it. And all of my photos live inside of Dropbox, which means they appear on all of my devices. And I turn sidecars on. You can do that from the preferences. If you haven't done this, I highly recommend go into your preferences, go to the Files tab. Oops, I actually had it turned off on this demo computer. And make sure you've got your sidecars turned on. What that does is all of your edits get written to a sidecar file. All of your metadata gets written to the sidecar file, and then they get synchronized across all your computers. So if I make a change on a photo here, when I go back to my desktop computer, the changes will appear there as well. So everything gets backed up, everything stays in sync. Now, one of the things you probably will have to do to make this work, and you're all going to think this is heresy, throw away your bad photos.
Yeah, unless you're working for a commercial client.
Yeah. When I do commercial stuff, I back it up. It goes to a completely separate spot. But for anything that's for me, I only keep the photos that I love. There's no reason I need to keep all those old photos. So, you know, I've got 20 years of photos that, you know, boil down to about 25,000 photos that fit in 300 gigabytes, I think.
Yeah, I'm jealous of that.
You shoot a lot more than I do.
I got 6 terabytes that's in a RAID array, a Drobo. But, you know, I think that's one of the weird things about digital. The revolution with digital is that in the old days of film, when we had transparencies or print, you went through and you're like, that's not a good one, that's not a good one, that's not a good one. And you wind up keeping 5 or
6 photos out of a roll of 36.
And those get stored because you had to have shelf space for the binders with those cataloged. And now in the digital age, it doesn't really cost us anything. Well, it does. It costs you efficiency and you know, storage space. But it's much harder to cull. You know, people wind up keeping everything. And I think, you know, if you're shooting for yourself, work towards getting the best you can get and only keep that. That's my thing.
As a matter of fact, I do the opposite. You know, a lot of people, when they do their culling, they start off and they say, I'm going to go through and throw away the ones that are bad, the ones that are out of focus or blurry. I do the opposite. I say, I'm going to go through and pick out my favorites. And I go through and pick out my favorites, I throw away everything else.
I sort of do the same
anything
thing.
That's mediocre or less, I don't want. So I only want the good stuff.
I'm giving 1 or 2 stars to everything that's kept and junking the rest. And after a while, I'll go back and look at the 1 stars, and some of those go too. Yeah, now I understand that is probably heresy to a lot of our viewers, but trust me, it's worked. So let's see. So we talked about the benefits of using an index folder, making sure you've got a good backup strategy. Again, I use a cloud storage service. I think it's a great way to back up. Everything is safe. It's safe environmentally as well. That's how do I describe that? If your house burns down or floods, your hard drive in your house isn't going to get saved. But in the cloud, distributed in different countries around the world, that data is always there. It's always backed up. It's always safe. And if you're like me, I have so much data that I love Dropbox. Dropbox works great. There are some unlimited cloud services, but everything I've read and people I've talked to, the upload download is so slow and they're a little finicky, and I don't totally trust it. So what I do is I just have raw hard drives. I have big 4 gigabyte raw or 4 terabyte hard drives are cheap that just go inside desktop computers, and I have a little dock that's connected to my big desktop back there, and I just drop a raw hard drive in, and I keep everything stored on a couple of those, and I keep them out at my mom's farm in case something goes wrong here. I can just run to her house, get those hard drives, and
definitely have some sort of off-site storage.
Grab the babies,
whether
grab the
it's
cats,
cloud or tape.
But I'm not worried about
You're
the
not
photos.
worried about the photos.
Yeah.
Exactly. That's the beauty of it. Let's see, what other good things do we want to talk about when it comes to browsing and setting up a good lasting system? So we talked about folder structures. We talked about indexing those and backing those up. And then you can use the search features without having to bother with keywords. Yeah. But that said, there are other times when you want to use keywords. We both have given you a couple examples of where you'd use keywords. Hudson's talked about the way he uses stars. I use stars in a very similar way. I use 1 star for my rejects, 5 for my favorites, and then kind of everything else doesn't get a star. Kind of think of it almost like the pick and the reject flag. That's kind of the way it works for me. But then there's also color labels. And color labels are totally different. Everybody uses color labels differently.
We totally use them differently. Yeah. So I use color labels. I use them for images that are really going to be made up of multiple images. So if I'm in the field and I decide I'm going to do a time lapse, I'll put my hand in front of the lens, take the first shot of just my hand, so I know that everything that follows is going to be part of one thing. And then I'll let the time lapse run, and when it's done, I take another photograph of my hand. So when I go through the grid view, I'll see either my hand or just a black slide, and I know that even if a single image in there doesn't look good, don't throw it away. I do the same thing when I'm capturing panoramic mergers, where it's going to be multiple files that go into making up one big image. Do the same thing when I'm doing HDR captures and bracketed captures. And that way, when I come in and I take a look at them, I immediately recognize, oh, the hand means something's going on. I would say, oh, that's a time lapse. And I'll highlight every image in the time lapse series and just color tag those as green. If I'm doing HDR, I color tag those as yellow. If it's a panoramic, I do blue. So every panoramic image in my library, including all the component pieces, are blue. And I know, oh, just because that's obviously a picture of half a tree, don't throw that away as I'm going through doing a subsequent cull, because it's too easy to just junk something that's actually critically important to a larger piece. And I know you do sort of a studio style.
Yeah, we use it to track workflow in our studio. So if it's a photo that a client has ordered but hasn't been sent to the lab, it needs to be cropped and retouched and things like that, we set them as yellow. So I can easily do a filter for yellow within a client's folder, and it shows me, here's all the ones they ordered that I need to go and get ready for the lab. When I send them to the lab, I change them all to green. And all the green ones I know I've already submitted to the lab. So there's lots of different ways you can use those colored labels to help you out in your organization.
I also use purple for images that are proofed and set up as print proofs. If I'm going to send them off for printing and I've already tweaked them in my color managed system, they're really not the ones I want to share on the internet because the colors may look garish on screen while they look great on paper. So, purple's my print.
Purple for print.
Purple for print.
Say that 10 times fast. Purple for print.
No. And I use red to just flag things that I might want to use for a project. That way I can just cull down to red really quickly. It's just something that's temporary. So, but there's millions of ways to use all these.
Yep, lots of different ways. All right, so Hudson, what's up next?
The next thing, we're going to do some editing, some live editing in Photo Raw 2017. I'm going to go into some landscape stuff from including a star photo. We're going to do some of the noise reduction and sharpening on a star image. We're going to look at a really high contrast scene. It's from that trip to Olympic National Park that I talked about a little bit earlier. It's a really, really wild, beautiful part of the Olympic National Park is the southern coastline. My good friend Andy Adkins, who's truly kind of the wizard behind the scenes of these live events, and he does a lot of the film work and editing for the OnLocation series. He and I hiked in there back in 2014 doing some promotional work for Photo 9, I think it was actually. And we had a really good time in there. We got some great images, and I want to go in, take a look at some of those and re-edit them in Photo Raw 2017. Then I think Dan is going to jump in and do some people photography work, some portrait work, and show you a portrait workflow.
Yeah, we'll show you kind of some before and afters over the years of what you can do in terms of portrait enhancement, portrait retouching. I'm going to share some photos that I've created and some of the photos that my wife Whitney has created, and I'm going to walk you through kind of a retouching, I shouldn't say retouch, more of an enhancement session on a recent photo that we just shot last week. So it should be a lot of fun. If you love portrait photography, stay tuned.
And in the meantime, just to kind of get the stage set for that Olympic coast trip, we're going to show you kind of a vintage ON1 on location about creating a 360-degree panoramic in Toliak Point along that southern coast. So hope you enjoy the video.
There's nothing quite like the excited feeling I get just before I head out on a multi-day photo expedition. Especially here, the Olympic coast in Washington State has everything a Pacific Northwest icon should. Towering rainforests, miles of uninterrupted beaches, and a marine sanctuary with lots of opportunities to photograph wildlife. The most impressive parts of the coastline are only accessible on foot, so you have to work for your images. It's remote and rugged, and I absolutely love shooting here. About halfway into the trip, I was setting up to shoot a 360-degree sunset panoramic at Toliak Point. The sunset was kind of anticlimactic, but the clouds were still dramatic, so I switched gears and created a 360-degree black and white image that in the end I was really happy with. So I'm here at Toliak Point. It's this amazing spot here on the southern Olympic coast. Got sea stacks sort of as far as the eye can see. And I found this spot that I thought would be pretty scenic for doing a panoramic merger to make an image that's both more enlargeable and lets me get more of the scene in one shot than a standard frame shot. And I've got my favorite 35mm lens here, the Zeiss 35 f2. I've got it set back on my tripod, and with this camera body and lens, you sort of have to ascertain where the nodal point of the lens is over the axis of rotation so that you don't get parallax in your panoramic mergers, so that they line up. And now with the new cameras, the live view just makes it like cheating. You turn on your live view, have your grid with Nikon. I know there's a grid, I'm pretty sure there is with Canon too. And you can just make sure that you get your overlap right. And I've got my exposure sort of calculated so that it's not overexposed in the sky, it's not underexposed in the shadows. I'm kind of balancing that. You have to look at the entire scene because it's not all going to be in the frame at the same time. You have to shoot it in manual mode. You've got to shoot it with your white balance set to a specific white balance if you're not shooting in RAW, so that you can change it later. I love doing panoramic mergers. They let me get much bigger prints, and they let me capture wider scenes without the distortion of a fisheye. It's a ton of fun. So obviously a lot went into processing this image. If you want to learn a little bit more about the techniques I used, there's a perfect inspiration video where I feature this image, and keep an eye out for upcoming ON1 on location shorts.
So before we jump in and start editing some of those images from the Olympic coast, I just want to remind everybody we're going to be doing another big Q&A session towards the end of this event. And go ahead and submit your questions, in the right-hand pane of the browser window, Facebook comments section, or with the hashtag #AskON1 at Twitter. So we're going to jump in here. I'm going to showcase some of the images from this trip here on my machine. I'm in Browse right now. And I'm going to go ahead and do that little tab trick that Dan was showing us. And you can see all the previews enlarge a little bit. We get a nice bigger view. And I'm going to jump into the film strip mode, which I really like in Browse here. Right when Andy and I hit the beach, it was kind of a foggy, fun morning. We found the trail pretty rough. There were some sections where we had to climb with some ropes up some vertical sections and rock hop out around points as the tide was coming in and out. And there were sections where we were up kind of high above the coast going through these really beautiful forests. And this is actually a straight RAW file, totally untouched. And I wanted to show one of the cool things here in Browse that I really love is the ability to jump in. You've got your browse controls that Dan's been showcasing in the organizing section and the what's new section, but there's also presets available right here in Browse. So if I want to just sort of see what this image might look like with a preset, I can go ahead, expand those presets, have a bigger look. And not surprisingly, I think the Sunstar image, my Sunstar preset in my core landscape, presets. Yeah, does a nice job right off the bat. Now I could go in and fine tune and adjust that, but I love the fact that I don't have to, that while I'm in browse, I can get a nice look at what a preset's going to look like on an image without ever jumping into either developer effects. And if I wanted to apply that to a bunch of images, I don't in this case, I could just highlight them and click sync and boom, you'd have them. So fun stuff. Go ahead and hit tab to get back out and we'll go back to that film strip mode. So, you know, if you follow my work, you know, I tend to recommend that in the middle of the day, you go out scouting for where you want to photograph at sunset that night, at dawn the next morning. Here we rolled into this cool campsite the first night, and we had a bit of a moment with some dramatic clouds, and I was looking for foreground subject for sunset and for dawn the next day. And when you've got some cool high contrast cloud scenes, it's a great time to do some black and white work. So I did a little black and white work, and I found where I really wanted to be for sunset. And you know, I set up this shot. We're going to go back to it in a minute and edit it through Develop and Effects and sort of see how good a job we can do recapturing some detail and in both the sun, where the sun is in the scene, and in the shadow detail. This is a really good test, a super high contrast scene here. But you know, I think whenever you're photographing something and you've got dramatic light like this, think about multiple ways to showcase the same scene. So, you know, here I am with a really wide angle lens. I think it's my 14mm Nikon, and then throw on the 70-200 and find another way to showcase the scene. You know, I really loved how this rock looked like kind of a sleeping giant looking out at the coast. And here's that 360-degree panoramic that we just showed the OnLocation about. That's the same point in the image as this point over here, so it's a little greater than 360 degrees. And once again, you know, I think that dramatic, cloudy skies in the middle of the day really, really work well for black and white work. And if you
pulling that exposure down so you keep that detail in those clouds.
Right. I think in our last live event, Dan and I talked a little bit about that, that if you've got sort of a dramatic, puffy cloud sky like this, you know, just underexposing a little bit, you can pull a lot of that detail back out in post-production. You know, the next night we had kind of a cloud bank that settled in, and just the very last second we got this one little bit of cool sun. And this is, you know, this is a point I teach in my workshops a lot. You know, even on a night where it doesn't look like there's going to be much drama in the sky, sometimes if you just keep your eye out, you'll find some little point of drama, and that's where having a long lens along with you can really, really help out. If you can fill the frame with what's interesting that's happening, you know, so it's not just a speck of color in a big gray scene.
Yeah. Don't write off what looks like it's bad weather. Be ready, because you know that may have only lasted for a couple minutes.
Oh, it lasted.
And if you were
seconds.
In the car staying out of the rain, you would have missed that.
Exactly.
So, yeah.
Of course, we were camped on that beach, and I had another surprise that night. I was just out planning to photograph blue hour, and we had this kind of marine layer moving over us, but there were a few stars peeking out of it, and I couldn't even really see this with my naked eye. But there's a tiny little town up north, kind of in the middle of Olympic National Park along the coast called La Push, and it had just enough light to do this crazy underlight on the clouds, and it really came out on the camera. As I was taking the picture on the camera, I was like, whoa, that's cool. Looks like a sunset with stars. And then the next morning was kind of one of those bland, you know, cloudless mornings. The sun isn't rising over the ocean, so we just got nice light from it, and I found there was this cool heron.
Love that.
Yeah. So then we hiked down to the last campsite, which is along a place called Mosquito Creek, which, you know, we were a little trepidatious about, but it wound up being a really beautiful location. No mosquitoes at all. It had some really dramatic coastline with these neat sea stacks and big pieces of woody debris. And, you know, one of the things, I just love this compare mode. You know, if I've got two images that are similar, I can just throw them up together and I can say, you know, I really like the one on the right better with a bit of a slower shutter speed. It's just a powerful way to go through our images. You know, a little point about this one, Andy was off doing something on his own. I was by myself, and I took a photo of this big stump, and it looked cool, but you didn't get a context for how big it was. So a little trick I did here was just set up the tripod and set the camera on a timer mode, so it takes, you know, 10 pictures after 10 seconds go by, and I ran back into the scene and just stood in it to give a sense of scale.
Looks like that snake's gonna eat you.
I know, right? That is a huge stump.
That's a big stump.
Yeah. It's a really, really beautiful place, you guys. We sat around, and the one thing we knew we were going to get, which we've been hoping the whole time, was this clear night was going to be a good night to photograph stars. And so the first image I'm going to go in and have a look at is this star photo of a sea stack here along the coast. And, you know, I want to give a few little tips about photographing stars. One thing you want to think about is, you know, the Earth's rotation can blur the stars in your scene. If you want pinpoint stars and a pinpoint Milky Way, you're gonna have to think about your exposure settings. And in this case, you know, I did 30 seconds. Well, that's because I'm using a 14mm lens. A really wide angle lens lets you have a longer shutter speed without blurring those stars' motion. And there's a little formula that I use. It's 500 over your focal length. So if you think about if you're shooting with a 10mm lens, 500 over 10, you've got 50 seconds that you can photograph without the stars blurring. If, in contrast, you're using a 50mm lens, it's 500 over 50, you've really only got 10 seconds. Yeah. So a wide angle lens with a wide aperture to let lots of light in is a really critical tool. So, you know,
yeah, that's a great formula. Like, write that down in your ephemeris notebook in your camera bag along with Sunny 16.
It's affected a little bit by how big the sensor is that's capturing it. It's a more complicated topic. That's for full frame. You know, you have to use that 1.5 factor if you're using it. It's a narrower view of the world that you're looking at. But in general, that full frame calculation works really well, 500 over your focal length. And the exposure calculation that I've come to, I'm a little off on this one, not much, but pretty close, is about 3200 ISO at f2.8 for 30 seconds. 3200 ISO, f2.8, 30 seconds. Now, obviously,
for that lens,
for any lens, then you just use your exposure triangle, your knowledge of it. If you have a lens that you need a shorter shutter speed for, maybe you need a higher ISO or even a wider open aperture if you've got a lens with a really wide aperture. You know, if you don't have that wide an aperture on your lens, you're going to have a higher ISO or a longer shutter speed. It's just the basic exposure triangle calculation. But that's my baseline. That's what I'm shooting for, is that 3200 ISO, 30 seconds at f2.8.
Yeah.
So,
and for you guys, if we're talking about the exposure triangle, if that's going over anybody's head,
yeah,
great video if you're a Plus user that'll teach you about how to manipulate and understand the exposure triangle.
Yeah, we're going to plug Approaching the Scene. It's a brand new course this year, just a little bit right after this section, and there's a video included in that that's kind of the precursor that talks about that whole exposure calculation for those of you that are a little fuzzy on it. It's a really great resource. So, you know, here we've got an image captured like that. You can see the Milky Way cloud in it. A lot of the shadow details blocked out. We're going to see what we can do here in Develop. And the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take a look at the histogram while I adjust these tones. And you can see, you know, for those of you that aren't so familiar with the histogram, the left side of it is representing black, the white side's representing white, and the middle is kind of that neutral mid-tone. And we've got all the colors distributed across it here. What I'm going to do is adjust the whites and the blacks, and the stars are probably going to be white. One thing I'm going to do too is I'm going to click on this little button here that's going to show me shadows and highlights that go completely to black or completely to white. So if I was to pull the blacks down a little bit, you'll start seeing this whole thing. This blue representation shows me it's pure black. And I want to just, to get the most contrast I can, have just a tiny bit of the scene in black. But I want there to be some shadow details. So I'm going to leave myself plenty of room for shadow details to come back in here. And then I'm going to pull the whites up. And I don't think there's any harm in pulling them way up. You know, there's probably a few little red speckles if we zoomed in here. But I think we're good to go here. So I'm going to turn that off. And then, you know, I can play with highlights. But there's just not much action in the highlights in the scene. You know, there's barely any here, so it's all going to be in the shadows. And I think that if we pull the shadow slider, we're going to see a lot of detail come flowing back into this image. This image, there's kind of a little happy accident. Andy and I were camping really close to here, and we had a little LED lantern hanging on a stick in camp, and it was a long ways from this C-stack. The tide was going out, so we have wet sand leading to the C-stack, and literally, well, you can see some noise there. We're going to work on that next. Literally, the light from that lantern far away just created this little bit of light painting on the rock, and it's kind of made me rethink how I do light painting in star scenes, because it's really, really cool.
I think if you manually light painted that, you'd probably been way overkill. This is nice and subtle.
It's nice and subtle, like I didn't do it at all, which is kind of what I'm always going for with light painting. So I'm going to go ahead, you know, I don't want to boost the shadows too much because I'm going to do some more in Develop where I have more control, or in Effects where I have a little more control with masking about where that shadow detail is being added, but I can see it's all there. I'm going to probably boost structure a little bit. We're going to see the most effect of that in the stars and in those kind of edges between the rocks and the, oh yeah, you know, one thing I can do here too to get a little bigger view is go into the loop mode instead of our film strip mode. We get a little bigger view of the entire scene. Dan's pointing that out to me while I'm working here. And then, you know, like Dan said, the haze slider does some things with sky, kind of highlight corrections and bringing the sky back. And it isn't going to do that much in the scene because we don't have that much going on in the highlights. So I'm not going to mess with that all that much. What I do want to check out is a couple of things. What is lens corrections doing for me here with my 14mm lens? It's getting rid of quite a bit of vignetting and just distortion up in the corners. And, you know, it isn't so important in a scene like this, but I like what it's doing for me here. And then details is where the action is really going to be here. I'm going to go ahead and zoom in on a critical part of the scene where we can see the stars. Let me go ahead and turn off that focus peaking. There we go. The highlight peaking. And, you know, just like Dan, the first thing I want to start with is noise reduction in a scene like this with a lot of noise. And in this case, you know, there's not a lot of color noise going on here. We can take a look here. I think if there's color noise, it's probably pretty large scale. I'm going to hold down the Option key. You can see it might be that what we really want to do is move this detail slider to choose. There it goes. Yep. We're just getting rid of it. We can adjust it a little bit more. And we've pretty much gotten rid of that color noise. Just that easy. So in this case, it was a different size.
Yeah, it was very large, diffuse color noise.
Color noise, yeah. So we were able to use that detail slider to target what size we were getting. Really, really powerful. And holding down the Option key is the key to seeing that kind of thing. So now we're just looking at luminance noise. I'm going to hold down the Option key again, which gives us that kind of grayscale, simply luminance view. And you can see as I pull this, I'm getting rid of that noise, but I'm losing some of the quality of the details in the rock. So I want to find kind of a fine balance. I don't mind there being a bit of noise in a star image. I'm going to probably come in here pretty aggressively, around 60 or so. And then I can choose with the detail slider, again, sort of laying out a mask of where is that, you know, what size grain am I after? And I think, you know, once again, we want it to be pretty fine. We're really looking for that tiny little noise. We're going to leave it pretty low there.
Yeah, definitely.
And then once again, sharpening. Hold down the Option key, I get a nice black and white view where no color is influencing my decision, and I can get some of that detail back in my image. And with the masking slider, I can see exactly where that's being applied and whether it's being applied to noise. And here I can see I'm really just applying it to the details in the rock and to the stars, which is what I want. And so if I turn this off and on, you can see, wait, where did I hit the wrong button there. There we go. Major and dramatic difference in the noise on this image. So the next thing I want to do is pop back out of this. I'm going to go to the nav view and go back to my fit view and jump in effects. And we're going to really do some stuff to boost these shadows a bit here. So in the tone enhancer, I'm going to pull up the shadow slider, which is just as powerful, if not a little bit more powerful than the developed shadow slider. And we're going to pull some of this detail back in the foreground of the image. Now that's kind of lightening up this light pollution that's in the lower part of the image. I can't remember the name of the town that's just south of Olympic National Park.
I cannot remember it either.
It's to the west of Olympia. There's a little coast town, and I'm pretty sure it's creating some of this kind of sodium vapor light pollution in here. And a quick tip for those that really like to shoot Milky Way scenes and totally dark star scenes like this is a color intensifier filter. When I was in Moab with Blake Rudis this year, Hoya asked me to test out a color intensifier filter with stars, and I was really blown away what a good job it did getting rid of kind of this green glow down towards the base of images with some cities in the near background. So that's a cool trip. Color intensifying filter. It just filters out that sodium vapor. So I want to go ahead and do this, but I don't necessarily want to have this effect in the stars, and this is why I'm doing it in effects. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to grab my masking brush, and I'm going to turn the perfect setting on, and I'm going to leave my feather about 100%. I tend to like a really soft feather. I don't want any hard edges to this kind of work. And oh, I'm only at 15% here. I'm going to turn my opacity up to 100%. And I'm just going to move through here. And for those of you that are wondering, that little yellow circle on my cursor on my mouse is really, that's just to show you where I am on the screen. That's a bit of software. It doesn't have anything to do with PhotoRaw 2017. That's a bit of software to just kind of help you guys follow along where my cursor is whenever I'm working. The neat thing about turning on this perfect brush setting up here is that if I don't cross that minus sign shows I'm painting the effect out. If I don't cross that line over the edge between the rock and the sky, it's not going to affect that tone around the rock, the shadows, the darker parts of the scene. I'm really only working on the sky. And you can see that when I go ahead and I hit my mask here, And then what I can do is I can turn that off while I have this mask scene up. This is the way I like to do it. I can shrink my brush down a little bit and then kind of finally go in here and get rid of that effect. I can paint more out. I could also, you know, I'm not going to go through too much of it right here because we're moving fast, but I would go ahead, paint in, make this really small, and get rid of the effect where it's hitting the dark shadows on the rock. You just go in and really fine tune this mask and get it exactly where you want. But I think that the basic gist of it, if I turn this masking view back off, is you can see the effect is now really limited to the foreground of the scene. We're not really affecting the sky and the Milky Way at all. And I want to go ahead, open up that masking panel here and copy that mask so that I can use it in the next move I'm going to do. You guys are going to like this. I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to add a sunshine filter, which seems a little odd,
I know,
right?
You'd never think of that.
Yeah, sunshine for space, essentially.
Sunshine for when there's no sun.
Sunshine for when there's no sun. We're going to use the sunshine filter here on a star image. It's like my little secret weapon with star images. And I tend to like the straight up sunshine style. I don't do much changing of it, and you can see it just adds kind of a darker background to space. It boils up that contrast between the Milky Way's cloud and the blackness of space behind it, but it's also making all the shadows in the foreground darker, and I don't necessarily want that to happen. So here's where we're going to use that copied mask. We go ahead, we just paste that mask in here, and now it's doing exactly the opposite of what I want, right? It's only applied to the foreground when what I really want is it to just be applied to space. So I'm just going to go ahead and hit invert, and now all of a sudden we're just applying it to the sky, getting just the effect that we want. So I think about the last thing I want to do here in effects, actually not even in effects, I'm just going to do a local, I want to add a little dynamic contrast.
Imagine that.
Imagine that. I pretty much add dynamic contrast to all of my landscape
I think
scenes.
we all add dynamic contrast to everything.
We do, because it just looks great. Now, at its base setting, it's a little much for me in this scene, and I have my own little style I've saved. You can adjust all these sliders just how you want. You go down, hit Save a New Style. I've created one called Hudson Dynamic Contrast. You click on it, and it just basically adjusts a little bit more small detail than your natural setting, and backs down this medium and large details a little bit. You know, that just lets you fine-tune where this contrast is being applied, this micro contrast and sharpening. You see here it's really in the stars. If I was to adjust the large details, it's going to be the bigger, blockier details in the scene. It's a really cool way to target where you're putting all this micro contrast. If I just click on my style again, boom, we're back to where I wanted it. And then I want to go into the local adjustments a little bit, because there's a lot of power here. I'm going to go ahead and do just kind of basically a little burning and dodging. And the way I want to do that, I want to turn the opacity of my brush. I've got my local adjustment brush highlighted here, and I'm turning down exposure about a stop. I want to go ahead and turn that opacity way, way down. We're going to go down to like 14, 15, somewhere in there.
You guys are seeing how Hudson's adjusting that. If you just click on the opacity label, it turns into a little hidden slider there.
Right.
As well.
You just click on the opacity slider, and then literally you can scrub back and forth to change that size to whatever you want. You could also click in there and type if you want to be super
or you can
precise.
click the little arrow and it'll pop out a normal little slider for you.
My little shortcut is just click on where it says opacity and scrub left and right while I'm holding down the mouse key or the trackpad on the laptop as I'm using now. So I want to go in and because I didn't have that filter, I'm just going to kind of darken up part of that green, you know, man-made light pollution in here, and a little bit of the space to the side of the Milky Way. I'm just going to go, I can hit it multiple times, kind of paint in just a little bit of darkening here. Do the same thing over to the other side. I want the perfect brush setting turned on here so that I'm not painting that into my foreground and my rock.
Or darkening the stars.
Or darkening the stars. Well, I'm going to cross over some stars probably as I go, but they're pretty much pure white anyway. Doesn't seem to affect them much. So I'm just darkening that edge around the gas cloud up just a little bit. You know, and I would go in and do a really careful job of this if I was not moving fast in the demo. And then I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to add another adjustment layer. And this time we can close the old one. This time I want it to be the opposite. I'm going to add a little brightness to the scene, you know, about a stop. And I want to make my brush a little bit smaller. Again, I've got 100% feather. Click on that again. Click on it. Oh yeah, we got to make sure we have it highlighted. And I'm just going to come down and I'm just going to paint just the gas cloud a little bit. We're just going to brighten it a touch. It's subtle, but we just want to make it so that it stands out. And if you take a look, it's subtle, but it's working for us. You know, if you turn both of these off, we had a pretty cool image. We turn it back on, all of a sudden this image becomes much more about the Milky Way. And then, you know, one more thing I could do here is I could go ahead and grab my, my graduated local adjustment tool. I could drop a graduated filter in here. Right now, it's affecting the upper part of the scene. So if I grab this little toggle here, I can just spin it around so that it's only affecting the bottom part of the scene. And I can go ahead and manipulate the feather, make it as wide a transition as I want. And I'm just gonna boost exposure just a little bit in the foreground, get a little bit more of that foreground detail feathered in so that we can see a little bit more of that wet sand and some of the stones in it. And I think we're pretty close to done. But one of the absolutely great things about Photo Raw, and here I'm in local adjustments, I can jump back into develop and I would just stay in local adjustments. That's kind of universal, whether you're in effects or whether you're in develop. If you're in local adjustments, you're in local adjustments, they stay between both. If I go back into the overall settings, now we're in develop, so we've got our tone and color sliders. One thing I like to do in Milky Way images is adjust the color temperature a little bit bluer, and I forgot to do that. Well, if I've been working in my past workflow, I would have done all my raw adjustments in, say, another raw processor, and then I've exported a PSD with those baked in and gone in and done all my work on the stars and all this fine-tuned finish editing work, and then gone, oh man, I forgot to blue up the sky a little bit. I'd have to go back to square one, redo the raw file, export it again. And you know, this is just huge that we're not even changing a pixel as we do all this editing. I mean, I tend to add just a little bit of magenta, a little bit of blue in my color temperature, boom. And so let's have a look at what this whole thing looked like. Oh, what were we going to say?
You know, and even beyond that, the fact that you're doing your adjustments in develop, but all the stuff you did in effects is still there.
Yeah,
it's still on top of it. You're the whole hootenanny there is all live.
We're watching it propagate through every single bit of this. And if we had another image that we wanted to process the same way, we could simply just go back to that film strip view and select a number of them and click sync. You know, if I had several of these selected, I could hit sync, and you know, we'd probably have to adjust some of our local adjustments differently.
A little odd on those photos.
Well, it would look really odd on those photos. We don't even want to try it. But you know, let's take a look one more time at what this looks like before and after, because here's what we just did. There's what we started with.
Very dark.
It's pretty darn dramatic.
Yeah, that's a huge difference.
So the last thing I want to go ahead and do, I'm going to jump back out here and we're going to run back to that really high contrast sunset scene back on the Olympic coast here. And here we're loading it up. I'm going to go back to the loop view so we get a nice big view of it.
Yeah. You even changed the photo inside of develop. You didn't have to go back to browse, pick the photo, and change it again. That's another thing, you know, if you're a user of an earlier version, you couldn't do that.
No, you would have had to gone back to browse. This is really cool to have this film strip here so that in the folder I'm working in or the album that I'm working in, it's all right there laid out for you. So jumping back in here, I'm going to go ahead and the first thing I'm going to do, just like we did before, I want to look at the histogram as I'm doing this, and you can see, you know, we talked about this right side's pure whites. The sun is always going to be pretty much pure white if it's blazing in a scene like this, but I want to go ahead and see what kind of detail I can recover. So I'm going to once again click on these little triangles. You can hold down the J key. I tend to like to watch the histogram and hit those triangles. So I'm going to hold down the, I don't have to do that because we've got the triangle key activated. I'm going to go ahead, pull my whites back some, and then pull my highlights back some, and just watch that recover. What I really want to get to is where it's, I don't mind it being blown out a bit, but I want it to be a little disc and not a big blob that's blown out. And I'm pretty impressed here with how much I'm getting back.
Yeah, you didn't get that yellow posterization a lot of times you get around the sun.
Which we had when we started out. And then here's, you know, where we can really test what do we have for shadow detail coming back, and that is really, really dramatic. Nice stuff right there. And in a scene right here with so much contrast, a lot of times I want to just back the contrast off a little bit and see what that does for me. You know, we're kind of trying to reduce contrast in this scene a little bit because we have such dark shadows and such bright highlights. You know, and once again, structure, we can add in some structure, which is kind of like dynamic contrast light in a way I like to think of it. It just adds some pop and a little bit of sharpening and micro contrast. And we'll try the haze slider a little bit. And in this scene with the yellows, it's going a little nuclear yellow to me, so I'm going to be careful with how much of that I want to add. It can make a sky, or it can break a sky.
Yeah. So with great power comes great responsibility. So.
Exactly. So I think at this point, I'm just going to go ahead and jump into effects and do some finish editing on this image. And one thing I want to do in the tone enhancer is the compression slider. And I like watching what's happening up here in the histogram while I do that. You can see it's really just sort of affecting the midtones in the image. It's moving the data into the midtones and creating some more midtone contrast. And then once I've done that, you know, I can back shadow detail down, put shadow detail back up. I want a little moodiness to this, so I might actually make the shadows just a little bit darker. I just like what that compression's doing for me in here. And then I want to, of course, add my touch of dynamic contrast. Once again, I'm going to use my style that I like a little bit better, which also I reduce opacity just a little bit. If you turn it all the way up, it just seems a little crunchy to me. So I like to kind of get the look I want and then blend it softly into the layers below it. And you know, really, I'm kind of liking the way that this image looks right off the bat. One thing I might test is whether some of the color enhancer settings, like I tend to like desert in a scene like this. It just does nice things with the oranges and the yellows. And by contrast, you know, the complementary colors, the blues stand out a little bit more in the sky here.
That's kind of the software version of that enhancing filter you were talking about.
Right. And you know, I would probably at this point, I believe my dear friend Andy was wandering through my scene here making footprints. Actually, I shouldn't throw him under the bus. It's probably me too. But if I go in here and I have a little view, go to the nav, maybe zoom into 50% here, kind of in the middle of our scene, I know from scanning this image that there's a whole train of footprints. And it's so cool that right here in the raw, you know, right here on the raw file in develop or in effects, I can go ahead, grab, you know, that clone tool and just start getting rid of footprints. You know, I won't do it all right now, but really easy to do here. And I could also grab the perfect eraser and maybe get rid of this little bit of lens ghosting that's going on here. So I tend to like the perfect eraser for a job like that in the clouds. I'm just going to make it kind of a nice size brush and just paint that in. We'll go back to the fit view while that does this little processing. It tends to just do a fantastic job. Boom, it's gone. So let's have a look one time at what this looked like before. Yeah, huge.
That's a big difference. I'm always amazed what that shadow slider can bring up.
It's amazing. And you know, it did a better job of this than I did in my editing workflow in 2014. I don't have that file with me right now, but I can guarantee you it was a bit splotchy looking. There was not as much shadow recovery. And the fact that, you know, like we were just talking about, I can bounce back and forth between develop and effects that quickly and easily and say, well, you know what, I might want to tone down the yellows a little bit. You know, anything I want to do is still there, propagating through all those effects. So it's just some really exciting stuff.
Yeah.
And I think that pretty much wraps up my little live demo here. Before Dan jumps into doing some stuff with the portrait workflow, though, I want to talk just a little bit about approaching the scene. It's a really cool course that we put together this year, ON1 and I in conjunction. It's in the Plus community. It's one of the core photo courses for the education training course section that kind of forms the backbone of the Plus community. It's a neat, different kind of concept where in each lesson we go in depth into a specific scene. We did a whole live event just a little bit ago about it. If you missed it, we just want to give you this little trailer about it. It includes that exposure triangle video that we were just talking about. So here is a little pitch for that. It's really cool. I hope you guys will check it out. And I hope you'll join Plus, because that's a great resource for learning more about editing and shooting in the field.
Every photographer I know, including myself, has arrived at a location and wondered, how the heck am I going to photograph this? How do I even approach this scene? Whatever scene you're photographing, finding a way to answer that question is at the core of creating a meaningful image. So I designed a course to shed some light on this and show you how I approach different scenes. There are plenty of courses that cover the latest camera technology or editing techniques, but this course is different. In each lesson, I approach a different scene, from scouting the location and choosing the right gear and camera settings to editing my captured images. I cover low-light scenes, sports and action scenes, location portraits, black and white scenes, panoramic mergers, time-lapse, and a bunch more. Solving the mystery of how to approach a new scene is one of the most difficult but rewarding challenges we face as photographers. So I'm really excited about this course, and I hope you'll check it out.
All right, welcome back. You know, I love approaching the scene. I think it's such a powerful course for people. There's all these resources online that tell you, here's the gear to buy, here's the filter, here's the software to use, but no one really talks about actually taking great pictures. No one talks about how to come to a scene and figure out how to do it. You know, you can buy all the gear you want and you step foot onto the beach that first time, you're like, wow, this is really intimidating.
How do I put it together?
How do I craft a great shot out of this? How do I look at the light and figure out when's the right time, what's the right angle, what's the right lens choice for what I want to capture?
It's really the way I approach my workshops too. I think that, you know, my workshops and my training, I really want to get it to the point where people walk into a scene and have the skill set and tools to look at it and analyze it and figure out a way to capture an image of it that says something about what it means to them. You know, it's all about that, using your tools and how you feel about a place to convey that message, or about any subject, whether it's a portrait like you're about to talk about.
Exactly. Well, kind of like you mentioned earlier, you know, most people think of me as a landscape photographer, and that's usually what we show and talk about a lot, but I'm also a portrait photographer, and I love to shoot portraits. I've done that for many, many years. My wife, Whitney Stevens, she actually owns Bliss Studio. She has some presets that are available. You see a lot of other blog posts and content from her as well. So I wanted to actually take this opportunity to share some portrait photos with you. I'm going to show you some before and afters of things we've created over the years, and then we'll also go through a particular photo that we shot just recently and actually show you how to do some editing on that. So you can see the style is fairly natural. A lot of that kind of that matte look is what's popular these days.
Not Matt Kloskowski.
Not Matt, well, yeah, the Matt Kloskowski look. Yeah. No, Matt is in, you know, it's not that high contrast look. But, you know, being able to really focus your viewer's eye, you know, like on this photo, we use some ability to add some motion to it. You know, it really creates a very compelling before and after experience. All right, so let's jump in, and I'm going to show you on a recent photo how to really kind of jazz it up a bit. Let me see. I'm going to turn my panels back on.
That's such a cool
here.
image.
I know, I love this one. Here, I'll show you real fast. So there's before and after.
Oh, it's so great.
Yeah,
it really is.
She has such that classic model kind of look there. So
nice.
Whitney always says, sucky photographer, good photographer. Sucky photographer, good photographer.
You guys are both great with people photos.
Let's grab a recent shot here. So here's one right here. This is one that Whitney actually shot with us just last week in downtown Portland. So I'm going to grab this photo, and we're going to take it into Develop. We're going to show you how to kind of optimize the lens correction and the perspective of the photo, and then how to take it to effects and kind of jazz it up a little bit.
Cool.
All right, so we'll start off here. This was shot with a, let's take a look. This was a 17-40 lens shot at about 30 millimeters. That's pretty wide for a typical portrait shot. You wouldn't want to do that, but this is much more of almost an architectural scene with your subject in it.
An environmental portrait.
Yeah, so we've got these strong leading lines of the door. We've got this heavy color contrast between the kind of that blue, green, teal of the doors and the red of her dress. We really want to play that up. We want to make her pop off those doors, and you also have this kind of this difference in the texture. So you've got this heavy rustic texture in that paint that's splitting against her very soft, you know, femininity. So you're trying to look at ways you can make your subject pop. That's why a lot of times photographers always look for that classic warm, cool mix. If we're doing landscapes, we always want to try to kind of look for that warm, cool change, especially in our sunsets or in our water shots. We do the same thing in portraits. We always look for how can we really make the subject pop off that background.
So complementary colors and wonderful.
Exactly. All right, so let's go ahead. I'm going to do a couple little optimizations, and then we'll move on to more of the stylization of it. So the first thing I want to do is I want to crop and adjust the perspective a bit. And here's a cool thing. You can actually do both at the same time. I'm going to grab the crop tool, and I'm going to turn it on, and then I'm going to crop this foot a little bit. I want to get rid of this this really dark area up above because it's kind of distracting. And the leading lines of the stairs are okay, but I probably don't need all 3 of them. I'll bring it up to 2. And then I'm going to bring these sides in a little bit so that it kind of matches a bit more. Then we'll turn on the transform pane here inside of develop. With the transform pane, I can now adjust that perspective.
You can do those at the same time?
Yep, you can do it at the same time. And I'd love to actually do it at the same time because a lot of times when you adjust transform, you're going to want to crop too because it's going to potentially show corners of the photo as you make big changes to it. So,
that is so cool.
Yeah, so now I can grab that vertical transform slider and I can adjust it to decide how much of those leading lines I want. I could leave it kind of where it was. For this one, I'm going to level it out a bit more. There we go.
So if you ever wondered why to shoot just a little bit wider than the final photo that you think you want, this is a really good example of that.
Yeah, exactly. And you can kind of see as I adjust that vertical, you can see how the bottom corners kind of turn into a trapezoid shape. That's because there's no pixels there. It's got to stretch the photo. So that's why I like to use the crop tool at the same time because it lets me adjust that. I could adjust it left or right too with that horizontal. I could even rotate it a little bit. I could rotate it with the rotation slider, or I could do it with the leveling tool in the crop tool at the same time. So I find that to be the way I like to do it. So I can just draw a line across something that I know is supposed to be straight, like that header. There we go. Cool. Now I've got it all set. Let me bring that down just a skosh.
Yep.
That's a scientific amount.
It is.
There we go. All right, I like that. And we will apply that.
That's really powerful. I'm gonna be using that quite a bit.
So that kind of lets you recompose and adjust that stuff in your photo. While I'm here, I'm gonna do a little bit of my raw processing. This was kind of shot on a bit of a cloudy day, was lit with just a reflector. And it's kind of a north-facing door, so you've got this very soft light
open shade
to start with. Yeah, so
open shade's
not
great
a lot.
for portraits.
Yeah, not a lot I'm going to have to do in terms of exposure adjustments on it. I'm probably going to make sure I got a good black point. So I'll go down to my black slider. Again, I'll do that hold the J key down trick, and I'll adjust this to make sure I've got some real blacks in the scene. That helps me make sure I've got some good contrast in it.
And that's the quick shortcut to the little triangles in the histogram trick that I was showing.
Yeah, if you just hold down the J key, or if you want them all the time, I think it's Option J or Shift J. I can't remember the keyboard shortcut right now. And then I'll adjust the whites. Now on a portrait, adjusting the whites can be a little bit tricky. A lot of the times in a portrait, the skin is the brightest thing in the scene. So you want to not get whites in the skin. Well, most of the time. There's cases to break the rules every time, but on a photo like this, I don't want to adjust those whites up so high that I'm starting to lose detail in the skin. And even when I don't see any red on the skin, those tones are going to be overexposed in one of the color channels, typically the red color channel. This is where looking at the histogram can be really important. So I can see the yellows not clipping yet. The actual, it's kind of hard to see, but right here, see where it's white? Where it's white, that's where all 3 channels start to clip. So if I was to adjust that whites up till that white touched the edge, that's when it's going to start to clip. I'm concerned about making sure that none of those color channels are clipped, or as little as possible. So as I adjust this, I want to watch that red channel too. Now I'm going to lose a little no matter what because I got that bright red dress. So, but I want to make sure that the meat of it isn't clipping. So I'm going to keep the whites pretty low. I'm going to make a very modest adjustment, or no adjustment at all to those. So there we go. So I've set my whites and blacks. I don't really need to do a lot with the shadows or highlights in this photo. I'm going to adjust it just so you can get an idea of how you can key shift a photo by using something like the shadow slider. So I can go from a very light open photo down to a very dark moody photo just using that shadow slider. That's kind of your key shifting slider.
The shadow slider is just all important.
Yeah. It's a portrait. I'm not going to use structure. I'm not going to use haze in a global fashion. That's something we're going to add in a selective way when we get into effects.
Does bad things to the skin.
Does bad things to the skin. If you want to look like a Simpson, you can do it there.
That's my exception. People photos, no dynamic contrast.
Yeah. Well, I'll use it. I just won't apply it to the whole photo.
Sure. You can mask it out.
Yeah. All right. So let's see. We've cropped it. We've corrected the perspective. We've made sure we've got some decent contrast in here. The next thing I want to do is I look at those doors, and the people that own this building put these chunks of cardboard in there.
Yep.
Obviously, cardboard is not the most attractive thing, but the bigger problem is it's about the same color and brightness as her skin, so she doesn't pop off as much. So I want to take that cardboard and I want to tone it down. So I'll use a local adjustment for that. I'll come in, I'll use the local adjustment. By default, it's already going to set to burn down a stop. I will grab my brush, turn it to the perfect brush on. You could always do Command R or Control R on your keyboard. That's kind of the shortcut for adjusting that. And I'm going to bring my feather down a little bit, down to about 25 or 30. And now I'm just going to paint in on that cardboard here to darken it up. I'm going to be careful around her skin, because keep in mind she's about the same color. The perfect brush will probably get in there and grab those too. Now on final artwork, I'm going to zoom in and I'm going to be very painstaking about this adjustment. Today, because this is for demonstration purposes and we're in a bit of a hurry, I'm not going to make it 100% perfect.
Yeah, you'd spend a lot more time.
Yeah, but you guys can kind of get the ballpark of how you would make this kind of an adjustment here.
That perfect brush setting is just awesome.
Yeah, plus I'm doing this on a little 3-inch trackpad on my laptop, which is not the easiest thing to brush with here.
I much prefer the Wacom tablet for this kind of fine work.
I forgot mine on my desk today. You can always hit the O key on your keyboard to actually see what that mask looks like. You can turn that perfect brush off with that Command R, and then you can come in and you can clean up some of those little tough spots, like where the cracks are that are darker, that it may have not filled in automatically. Same thing maybe down here under her arm, and making sure we clean this area up underneath. Again, I'm not going to get this 100% perfect today. You can always hold down the Option key to temporarily switch it from paint in to paint out.
Yep.
So if I hold down Option, you can see how it switches over, so I can clean up these little spots on the inside of her arm. Make my brush a little smaller. Okay, let's repeat the same thing on the other side now. Make my brush a little bit bigger. And we'll paint that in over here. Hudson will hum some music, so this is a little more exciting for you guys while I do this.
Some mariachi music, maybe.
I always feel like there should be some sort of background music while I brush.
Yeah, classical's nice for editing.
I always like jazz.
Yeah, jazz too. Whatever you like, really.
Whatever you like,
But it's a great time to listen to music while you're editing.
This is the part where you fast forward in the recorded version. You may fast forward now. You can see a couple spots where I forgot to turn my perfect brush on before I got started. I'll just paint those guys out here real quick. Here's a cool little trick you might not know. If you click with the brush, move to your new spot, and shift click, it'll draw a straight line between them.
No.
Yeah, so it's perfect for cleaning up straight edges like doors, windows. So I'm going to go shift click.
Wow.
I'll turn it on so you can see it. So I just painted that little guy back out here. So now if I come over here and I shift click, I got to see where the spot is supposed to be at, right about here. And watch if I shift click, zoop, paints it right back in, just like that.
Nice.
So of course I had the perfect brush on, so it did that perfectly, which I probably didn't want. Let me do that again. Zoop, there we go. So we'll clean those little spots up. There we go. A little bit more to do around here. Oops.
You're going to be painting.
Make sure I'm painting in, not painting out. A little reflection of her arm there in
right. There's a little
glass.
shadowing.
There's actually glass in front of this cardboard, so I gotta try to tone this back a bit. All right, so there you go. You guys get the idea. Now that I've created that mask, now I can do whatever I want with that cardboard. So using that adjustment tool, I can make it darker, so I can bring it down a little bit more.
So cool.
And let's shift the color. I want to make it in that same color family as more of that teal color. Bring its saturation down a bit.
That's great.
There we go. So something more like that. So now, oops, I always do that. It takes that cardboard and pushes it away from her color. Again, final artwork, I'd spend a little more time cleaning up that mess to make sure it was perfect.
Yeah, she stands out so much more, and it fades into much less of the, that's great.
Yeah, so let's go back there. You know, I'm actually gonna make that even a little darker. There we go. All right, now let's go to effects. I'm gonna go off to effects. And I'm going to add a color enhancer first. What I want to do with the color enhancer is I want to push that red color further apart. So I'll go to the color enhancer. I'm actually going to start off with the same preset that Hudson actually used, which is the desert one, which is designed to take the reds and pull them in a certain direction. That would be a good place to start. Let me show you another way. This is actually what I like to do. I use the little dropper tool down here, the targeted color tool, and I can just set it to saturation, and then wherever I click in the photo, I will adjust the saturation of where I click. So if I come over to her dress and I click, it's going to automatically grab the reds. If I drag to the right, it's going to increase the red saturations. I drag to the left, it's going to decrease the saturation.
I use that a lot. It's a great tool.
Yeah, so that you target just that color you want. So I'm going to give her a really bright red dress so that she really pops off those doors and even more.
The floor under where it's painted on that top step is doing the same thing.
Yeah,
too.
and if I wanted to, I could brush that out. I actually don't mind
like it, though,
popping out a little bit. Now it's a little nuclear there. Let me go back to not quite so high. Let's go about 40 or 50. There we go. I'm going to turn that on and off so you can see before, after. See, boom, just pops off that color now in there. All right, now, guess what I'm going to add? Dynamic contrast.
Dynamic contrast.
Yes, we all love dynamic contrast. So,
but you're going to do it carefully.
I will do it carefully. I'm going to do it the cheating careful way, though. So,
you're going to use the blending method.
Yeah, exactly. So I'll come in here. Let's add a dynamic contrast. And I'm going to use surreal just for now, so it's really obvious so you guys can see it. That's not what we're going to use for the final one. Now, I don't want it applied to her skin at all. So what I'll do is use the blending options control. I'll roll it down. There's a protect skin slider.
And this is powerful stuff, guys.
So as I turn that up, it's going to pull it off of more and more of the skin colored tones. So I'm going to bring that up until I notice that it comes off her skin but stays on everything else, probably 30 or 40. Here we go. Now I'm going to switch back to a natural one instead of the surreal. I'll turn that on and off again so you can see it. See how her skin isn't affected, but the detail in that door is, so it pops out. So again, you're trying to create contrast. You've got the red versus teal contrast. Now you've got this soft versus hard contrast. Really trying to make things pop. Next thing I want to do is I want to actually use a vignette. I have these really bright outside edges. I could come in and try to crop those off all the way, but I don't know if I would. I think I'd lose something in the photo if I did that.
It's got this neat layered effect coming in.
Exactly.
Left and right.
Yeah. And it adds context to the stairs. If I crop those off, then I don't know what I'm doing with the stairs then.
That's true.
So instead what we'll do is we'll use a texture as a vignette. We'll darken the edges by applying a texture to it. So I will add a texture filter. Let's go to the textures. You notice when I click on textures and I go to my filters tab, it shows me all of my textures over here on the left hand side with my photo in them, and I can do a search. I know I'm looking for the grunge vignette, so in the search I'll just start to type grunge. There we go. I'll grab grunge vignette dark. That's the one I like. There we go. I can use the opacity slider here to control how strong that is. Of course, I could always flip it around, change it. I could use different blending modes to have it blend in differently. In this case, I want it to be darker, like so. And I'm going to pick about yay much. Now, I don't want it to be applied to her. So again, I can use that same trick. I'll just grab that skin protection slider and pull it up, and it'll start to pull it off of her skin.
Awesome.
Just like that. So there we go.
The blending controls are amazing.
Yeah, so let's take a look at kind of the before and after here.
It's a huge difference.
Yeah. So there's the original, kind of out of the camera.
Which looked great when we first looked at it.
Yeah, which we like out of the camera, but this is a much more compelling shot. That texture's probably a little too strong. Let me back that off a little bit more.
What's Whitney's catchphrase for that?
Yeah, that's right. Here we go. Oop. Sucky photographer, good photographer. There you go.
Awesome.
All right. So I've kind of walked you through some of the cool things that you can do. This is just one example. There's tons more tutorials on our website. There's actually a whole series that I've put together on portrait workflow, but it's also Portrait Month in the Plus community as well.
It is. We've got Liz LePage as a guest coach this month in Plus. Really, really exciting stuff. We're going to be talking about photographing people, DIY studio setup. We actually just cut about an hour and 10-minute video here in the studio talking about working with models, getting model releases, setting up your own studio in your house, in your garage, outdoors, without spending a whole lot of money. Liz is awesome. I know a lot of you guys have seen her tutorials in the past, working with different aspects of the software. The Plus community is just a really, really great place for anybody wanting to learn more about photography in any aspect of photography. We just had Colby Brown guest coaching last month, talking about sort of developing your own creative vision. We've got Liz this month with people. Next month we're going to have Matt back. We'll do some fun challenge where we challenge the Plus community to come up with the best image, and we have cash and gear prizes for them. And we also do photo critiques every month. So this month we're in the midst of a critique submission period where people are putting in photos of people, and Liz and I will go through and comment on every single photo that people have put in.
Yeah,
so.
I love how there's so much variety, and from month to month, depending on who the guest coach is. I mean, Hudson's always there; he's kind of your rock. But there's depending on who's teaching. 1 month you could be doing waterfalls, and the next month you could be doing kayaks, jumping off of waterfalls, and then the next month you could be working on photographing children. It's such a big difference in the community.
The amazing thing to me is just the general tone of the community. It's like it is the nicest bunch of people, and they're very collaborative. They jump in on all the discussion forums. We have a forum where you can just ask a coach a question about anything, and either the guest coach or I will get back to you with an answer. And we've got forums for people to comment on each other's images or locations. Hey, I'm going off to Death Valley. Where's a good place to shoot there? And all the different content that we're coming up with all the time, new training videos, things people are commenting and batting stuff back and forth. And I got to say, there's really not been a single troll to date in the Plus community, and we've got a lot of great people in there. So it's definitely something to check out, and you get a whole bunch of training materials and the soft, it's all available to you right there. So.
Yeah. Well, what is the most boring slideshow in the world? It's a slideshow with no music to it.
Yeah, it's true.
So great music makes a big difference in the emotional impact of your slideshows and your videos. And
or time-lapse.
Or even your time-lapse, yeah, especially. So we're really lucky today to be sponsored by Triple Scoop Music. If you're not familiar with Triple Scoop, they're kind of the leading industry provider to licensed music content. They make it super easy with very flexible licensing options to get music into your production. So we have 25,000 hand-picked licensed songs. You can start a free account now, and ON1 customers can actually save by using the discount code of ON1 to save 15% on your Triple Scoop account for a limited time.
And if you're not using music in your slideshows or your time-lapse or your video, you're really missing out. It can create so much more emotional impact in the production value. It just really pulls people in when you've got a bit of music to work with. So this is a great resource for that.
And licensing that music is the way to go. We're also protective of our images and our photos, being creative. Musicians should be afforded the exact same rights.
Oh,
so
yeah,
if we're going to be using their work to promote us, we should be licensing their music.
So with that said, we've got a great little video from Triple Scoop showcasing what we're talking about. Hey guys, welcome back. We're going to do some Q&A at this point, and we've gotten a lot of questions in on Twitter or on Facebook. Right here in the right panel of your browser. If you want to get a question in quick, we're taking them right now, so now is the time. I'm just going to start off here. The first one is a DNG support question. Okay. Do we support DNGs? Is ON1 ever going to support DNGs? Yeah, it should just convert to TIFF.
The photo that we were just working on, this portrait, was a DNG.
Awesome.
So a DNG is just another raw type of photo to us.
Right.
So it's just another raw photo. So.
Sweet. So, yep, I guess the answer is it's already supported in 2017.5. Yep. Will 2017 incorporate a stacking feature like Lightroom?
That's a great question. So a little gnome told me that this is not the end of our releases for the year. There's still more stuff that we're working on. So part of that more stuff that's coming actually is a grouping feature, so that you can actually take, basically the pictures between the pictures of your hand that we use to bracket our brackets and put them into one group. Think of it kind of like a virtual folder, where you can take them all together, and then your favorite one can sit on the top, and your edits can apply to one or all. Same thing with the metadata. So, and
that's hugely important in time lapse. Let's say I have 500 images in time lapse for a 20+ second time lapse. I don't want to have to scroll through all those to get to the image I took after my time lapse, so I can just select all those, highlight that those are green, and then collapse them. That's going to be great. Yeah. I'm really looking forward to that. So does ON1 support tethered capture?
Good question. It's one we don't support yet. It is a common request in our community. If it's important to you, you can go to the ON1 photo project on our website. You can vote that up or add comments to it, and it's something that hopefully we'll be able to look at in the future. Now that said, you can, because it's a fast, ON1 Photo is a fast browser, it will just look at any folder, and as new photos are added to that folder, it'll automatically show up on screen. So you could use the tethered shooting software that comes with your camera, and you'll still get the photos added into Photo automatically just by watching whatever folder you told it to shoot to.
Cool. We got a question here, coming back to the DNG topic a little bit. Will RAW save metadata to the DNG, or does it still need a sidecar file?
So it will actually save the metadata, like keywords, description, that sort of stuff, actually gets written back into the DNG. The processing settings, our proprietary sidecar file, will still get created for a DNG file. And that's because the data format that we use for holding our settings doesn't work well with the kind of the text-based way that a sidecar file works. So we store a lot of information in a different way. So it doesn't make sense to put that into the DNG.
So a couple questions about Lightroom. If you're migrating from Lightroom and you import your files with all the Lightroom corrections, so it's going to build a PSD or a TIFF file with all the Lightroom corrections, do you still get the raw untouched photo alongside it?
Yeah. No, no matter what, you'll always get the original photos, and it doesn't matter if it's raw or JPEG or whatever the original photos are, you'll get those. And then if you turn that option on to migrate the settings as well, you get a duplicate stacked right next to it. It's named the same way. I think it just has export at the end of the name on it. So,
and if you're working in Lightroom still using Photo Raw as your say effects as your finished processing engine, can you still batch process multiple images out of Lightroom? Can you select a chain of them and say you want to edit them in effects?
That's actually one that is better done through ON1 Photo instead. So if you want to do batch processing, because it is so much of a non-destructive world now, I do all my batch processing through ON1 Photo instead. You can still use it as a plugin for kind of one photo at a time, but it's a slow process. It's so much faster to do it in a non-destructive way instead.
Okay. Question here about keywording. If I've created keywords already, can I go back and edit the keywords that are in my list?
Oh, sure. Well, you can certainly edit the keywords on an individual photo, and what we do is we kind of build up a list of all the keywords on all the photos that you've created. That makes it faster for us when you want to add a keyword. We can auto-complete and find keywords that are similar to it to make it easy for you to add those keywords to it. That list is kind of automatically created and maintained.
Okay. We got a question here about if I've gone through and put X's on the photos that I don't want. I've disliked images I don't like from a shoot. How do I get rid of them from the machine? And I saw one person said that they hit the delete key and deleted a whole bunch of images that they didn't want to. Well, I think the filter panel in Browse is the way that you're going to do that. If you just activate the filter panel and filter it so that all you're seeing is the disliked images, then select all those and just delete them.
Yep. And I think there's actually even a pre-built filter. Let me go look here. It's been a while since I've done it that way, but I believe if you go up to... Probably going to not remember how to do it now. Could have swore there was a select rejects command. If I could spell. Select all, select none. No, sorry, I thought we had that in there. Something we'll add in the future is a single menu command for selecting just the rejects to make that easier to delete those guys. But like Hudson said, the thing you need to do now is you just go to the filters pane and you click on the little reject filter right there. None of the photos in that folder were rejects, so obviously they're not going to show up. But let's say I just mark this one as a reject really fast.
Sure.
And I only want to see the rejects. I would just hit that reject button, select all, delete.
That's how I do it.
Yeah.
I got a quick question, easily answered here. If you migrate your catalog from Lightroom, does it remove the catalog from Lightroom? Absolutely not.
No.
And you can still open it in Lightroom, and you can work side by side. They're going to write separate sidecar files or separate catalog instructions for Lightroom as the sidecar files for ON1, but they'll live in those independent systems just fine.
Yeah, and there's nothing to say that you can't continue to use both. We provide that as an option, but we still have a lot of users who will use Browse as their front end to Lightroom, where they'll do their culling there because you don't have to actually catalog them first. You can just quickly browse through a new shoot, go through and pick out your favorites, add your metadata. Those all get written to XMP sidecar files. You can then select all of those and right-click and say send to Lightroom. Then Lightroom can catalog those and gets all that metadata added for the ones that you care about. So you can use it as a front end. You can also use it as a plugin to Lightroom as well. So like we mentioned before, you can still use Lightroom for your raw processing and all your other work, and then just send it out to ON1 Photo for the special touches on a finished photo as well. So we'll fit into your workflow however you want, and we certainly don't want to dictate your workflow.
Oh, no. I got a few questions about future supported automations like focus stacking. Is that something that's on the horizon?
Focus stacking is one that we hear about. I don't hear about it as much as we do other features. I'd say if it's important to you, go to that ON1 photo project page on our website and you could find that feature. Just use the search field and type in stacking. I'm sure it'll show up, and then you could add your vote to it, and that'll increase the chances that we'll add it in the future.
There's a person who's asking if you can keep all the editing tools that you like to use on each photo and have them just pop up again for you each and every time. There's a really easy way to do that. Just save a preset. Do the adjustments that you like to do to pretty much all of your images. Save it as a preset, and then it's a simple click in the preset panel and it'll pull up all the tools that you like, and you can just tweak them to taste for that particular image.
Yep, you can even mark that preset as a favorite, and it'll be at the top of your preset list that way. That said, it is a feature that we've heard people ask about, kind of having default settings. So when they actually go and look at a folder, it could have default settings applied to photos that are kind of tuned to their taste. Maybe they like it a little warmer than we like.
Like an import preset.
Yeah, kind of like an import preset, or being able to assign a preset to a folder. If it gets moved to this folder, a certain preset gets added automatically. And those are things that we'll consider for the future as well.
That's a good idea. So here's a question. If your lens isn't currently supported with lens corrections, can you add it manually?
So if your lens is like a really old lens and it doesn't transmit metadata, you're using a manual focus lens, or you're using it through some sort of an adapter that loses that metadata, or you got a brand new lens and we just don't have it in our database, you can go in and you can adjust the settings manually for the distortion and the fall off and the chromatic aberration, save that as a style, and you can use it over and over again. And then hopefully in the next release we'll have our profile version for that lens available if it's a new lens and we just haven't added it yet.
Right.
So
we have one more question. There's a little confusion, I think, still about if you edit a raw file in both Photo RAW and in Lightroom, is one going to look at the other? No, they totally are an independent set of metadata instructions for that raw file. So you can edit the photo how you want it in Photo RAW 2017 and fire up Photo RAW 2017. You're going to see those edits. If you open it in Lightroom, you won't see those edits, but if you've done editing in Lightroom, you will see the same edits you did in Lightroom. You can edit them completely different ways in the two, and the same file is going to look different when you open it in each.
And the key thing is the raw file that both Lightroom and us are looking at is 100% safe. It's untouched. Both systems are non-destructive editors, so there's nothing wrong if you want to work that way of doing it in both spots. Some people who are still working in the transition, they might do most of their work inside of Lightroom, but they want to try our app out. There's no risk or danger in doing that. So.
No. There's someone asking, they currently use a whole bunch of different editing products, and they're wondering, what is the true advantage? It looks like maybe the creative post-processing and raw developing can all be done in raw, and I would say, yeah, that's the huge kind of revolutionary thing. We're talking about the ability to have a really, really fine-tuned, highly powerful clone tool on your raw file, layered editing with detailed masking and a smart kind of content-aware, perfect brush to mask, all those really, really high-level tools that give you a super intricate, delicate mask on your raw file and with really, really high speed, and to be able to bounce back and forth between your raw underlying adjustments and those finish editing moves that you do in effects, and watch them all propagate through each other, and have access to localized adjustments like graduated filters, which you can adjust however you want to be darkening or lightening one part of the image and not another in a really smooth, graded way, along with brush strokes for dodging and burning or noise reduction, whatever else you want to do. It's pretty amazing to be able to do that all without changing a pixel or creating a secondary file to do your finish editing work on.
Yeah, to me that's the key, is that non-destructive nature, and that's really the reason why we created this. Our past were plugins for Photoshop and Lightroom, but we couldn't maintain that complete non-destructive capability if we didn't add those features to it. So that's why we did it. So if you use a lot of other apps, you kind of create this fractured workflow where it's really hard to go back in time and make changes, because each step is dependent on the previous one. So
right,
kind of makes it tough.
So one is, do you feel that ON1's ready to be a standalone for your entire workflow like Capture One or Lightroom?
Yeah, I totally believe that. I mean, I don't use Lightroom anymore. I just use this. So
I do a little bit of both. There's a couple things in Lightroom where, soft proofing prints. That's a big thing for me, and so I know Dan's working on that. That's something that's coming in the future. That's a place where I jump back into Lightroom for. But I mean, it's got everything that you need, and I'm finding myself more and more and more doing my raw developing in Photo Raw, just because of that power to be able to bounce back and forth, and the fact that I can always get back to my raw edits without creating a new file. It's just the ability to work on one file for me and not have to go back and go, oh, I messed up my raw developing and I need to just junk the TIFF PSD file that I've been working on for an hour and start over. It's huge.
Exactly.
So I find myself pretty much living in raw these days.
Yeah.
So the last question that we've really got here, it's one more about Lightroom and raw. There's still a little bit of confusion. Can I do editing in Lightroom and then continue with it in raw? Well, you can, but you do have to export a PSD or a TIFF file, just like what I was talking about. If I'm working on a file in Lightroom and I've done all my developing moves in there, and I want to keep all of that processing that I did in Lightroom and then use effects kind of in the older school workflow, you're going to need to export a TIFF file or a PSD file and then move from that, work on that in effects and save a secondary file. Because, ON1 Photo Raw is not going to see the Adobe processing instructions.
Exactly.
Or vice versa.
Or vice versa. I mean, they're two separate roles. They do similar things, but the algorithms and the way they do things are completely different.
Right.
So that's like one of the reasons with the Lightroom migration tool, we have to make a copy rather than trying to migrate those Lightroom settings over. No matter how good a job we did at that, the photo would still look different at the end of the day, and we're obviously very picky about what our photos look like. We work very hard on them, so we want to make sure you get exactly what you created.
Right.
So.
Right. So I think that about wraps up our Q&A. In closing, I'd say, Photo Raw 2017 has been amazing. Just the ability that we've just been talking about through this Q&A section of having that raw processing power with so much control. I always thought of it as a two-step process, raw processing, then finish editing. Now it's getting all kind of blended and confabulated together. Because of the good work that you guys have done, and the speed is really, really impressive when you're doing all those edits. It's a blast to use, and I'm really, really enjoying it.
I mean, we're doing all this today on like 5-year-old, tiny little underpowered laptops.
No, and I think every photo I worked on live was a Nikon D810 36 megapixel raw file too. So. There's no slowdown with pulling those sliders or adding masks or painting or layering upon layering upon layering with local and global adjustments. It's pretty darned impressive. And Dan's lens transformations and crops, it's pretty cool stuff. So Just want to point out that we've got fun stuff happening in the ON1 Plus community. You can keep track of me there. I'm pretty much a constant presence, answering the Ask a Coach questions, commenting on posts, creating content and training content, and working with the guest coaches again this month. Liz LePage, people. It's a lot of fun in there. If you're not already a member, I really hope you'll join us. And I'm also super active on my social channels, particularly on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. So look for me there.
Yeah, and you can follow ON1 on those same channels as well, through our blog and through the ON1 Photo Project. That's a great way to provide us feedback. If you're a Plus member, it's another great place where you can provide us feedback, but you can follow us on Facebook and Twitter and Instagram as well. Kind of like I mentioned before, we're not done. This is just another release along the way, so there's still lots more cool stuff around the corner. The next release, we kind of mentioned, is going to have groups. We'll also save your PSDs at about half the file space that they take up now. We'll also be making some improvements to those index folders so that you'll get larger previews and more granular control over those in the future. Plus a lot of other versions will be coming in the future as well. So lots of stuff to look forward to if you want to have your input on what we work on. Again, that photo project is the place to tell us all about it. Today's session is recorded again, so you'll be able to watch this again back on Facebook or on our YouTube channel here very soon as well. I think we got to all the questions that were out there. We appreciate everybody for joining us today, and we really appreciate the crew for helping us out and putting this great production on. And I wanted to give a shout out to the developers and QA guys back at ON1. Great job on 2017.5. The community is going to love it.
Huge shout out to Andy, Patrick, Woody, and Stephanie for running this project as well as they have. It's been a really, really fun thing to host in my studio. Thanks to ON1 for letting us do it, and thanks to you guys for watching.